Infants on Thrones. The philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the core.
Welcome back to a special Rush edition of Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Osland, and what you're about to hear is basically a raw recording, because sometimes it's just more fun to be first. So, as many of you already know, yesterday, October 22nd, the interwebs were abuzz with 3 new essays on polygamy on LDS.org. Well, we got together and tackled the first of those, Plural Marriage in Kirtland and Nauvoo. And this time, we got an actual expert to Smackdown with us. So you're about to hear a very long, unedited discussion with John Hamer and fellow infants Matt, Jake, and Randy, who joined us about 30 minutes into the conversation. So sit back and take it all in, because, polygamy. So what I want to ask you at the outset, John, do you have any inside information on who's writing these things and putting them up on LDS.org, or what this whole initiative is about?
I think I do, but I don't. I'm terrible about secrets because I don't care about secrets, and so I'm on a couple backlists for different blogs, like the BCC blacklist and that kind of thing, and there are people there that are connected into the church history department and stuff, and so I have heard that. So people know who's writing these things, and so people have written them out, listed off people who are writing different ones of them, and I know some of the names and things like that, but I don't remember any of that details because I just don't care.
Okay.
So anyway, it's a known thing, in my opinion, that where these things are coming from in the insider circles in Mormondom, but I don't, but it's secret, right? So.
Is it a committee or a single author?
Committee.
Okay.
Committees. I think it's committees, and it's there's heavy fingerprints of certain individuals behind certain ones of them, but again, I don't know. How
about the interaction with the apostles' first presidency? Are their fingerprints on this as well?
So that I don't know.
Okay.
I'm also, I have to tell you, I'm unfortunately, so one of the ways where I'm out of LDS-dom and Mormondom is that one thing about your guys' podcast, when you're imitating all of the different Mormon general authorities, I've never heard a single one of them talk. And I'm sure it's really funny, but but I've never heard a single one of them. So I don't know anything about it.
John.
I don't
because
care about
our impressions are so spot on.
Exactly.
It's just so hard that you wouldn't know.
It's a shame.
I imagine they're fantastic, but I just don't care about Mormon leaders and all of their nonsense and all that kind of thing. It's like, for me, it's all like Kremlin watching. So everybody is constantly looking at all of these, Kremlin tea leaves about this and that and the other thing, and I just think it's all just worthless and nothing, because the institution is so absolutely unfixable that it doesn't matter if Monson dies tomorrow and Packer starts ruling, or whoever's in charge. It's all the same. None of them have a whit of independent personality. They can't. It's all beaten out of them, and there's it doesn't matter.
But they don't need it, because it's Jesus, right? It doesn't matter who Jesus is speaking through.
It's nothing. It's all the institution. The institution has killed all of them just the same as everybody else. Okay.
Right, so it's a system, and the system, the stone cut without hands literally will move on regardless of who's on. It's just that stone is a system, is a program that's been established by the institution.
Yeah.
And so all poor liberal friends that are on the inside of it who are reading these chiefs, and they're like, oh, this means there's going to be this good thing happen. No. It's nothing. It's not going to be any good thing. They're just all they're all lying to themselves, and eventually, what happens to all of them is they all get burned out. Because at a certain point, all that hope is just going to be crushed.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have anyway.
It's a sad thing.
Is it worth pointing out that these 3 essays on plural marriage come on the heels of a report that the church is going to open or is going to allow civil marriages before?
Is there anything to that, though? That looks like it's
there's no confirming evidence from the church's side that that's actually the case, right?
Yeah, that seems a little...
every time noise has happened, something like that has happened, it's tended to be pretty accurate. It's been my experience over the last few years that when it gets that type of
that they're going to require.
You're right. It's not verified.
That they're going to require civil marriages before they do temple sealings,
or that's going to be an option, is my understanding.
How does that?
But it's already an option.
No, it's not an option. It's not an option in
without
the
the waiting period, you mean?
Correct.
Right.
It's the same.
Okay.
The same policy that's in place in foreign countries will be in place. Will be instituted in the U.S. That's my understanding.
So is there some legal loophole that then the church would not be required to solemnize gay marriage if there's a civil union?
They already aren't required
to,
so they don't need to make this change.
Yeah.
No, this is like like one of these things based on being right wing paranoia.
Right.
In other words, so in other words, they may well be doing it because they are right wing paranoid freaks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In other words, they just think that this is, or they're doing it to make because on the one hand because they are, and two because it then juices up all of their own people to say, look, we had to do this because of all those horrible gay people or whatever.
Oh, like the manifesto. We had
look what the gay people made us do. Yeah. Now you have to get married in the cultural hall. Yeah. Oh. If it weren't for those gays, we could get married in a beautiful temple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something like that. Or something like that. Yeah.
Right.
I presume that's why.
All right. So you've given us some context for the essay, Matt, but it's probably going to take us a while to get through this thing if we're doing it BOA Smackdown style. So let's just jump into it and start paragraph by paragraph. Do we have a volunteer to start?
Yeah, which one do we want to start with? There are three. There's plural marriage.
We're not,
plural.
Oh my gosh, there's no way that we're going to
do one. Just Kirtland and Nauvoo.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Which,
even better.
By the way, I mean just the title, plural marriage in Kirtland? Wow. That's a bold statement right there in the title. I mean, aside from Fanny Alger, was there any Kirtland polygamy that you ever considered, John?
Well, so what they're trying to do, I think, in the course of this statement is, in the course of the whole essay, is dig out a precedent to say that before the Fanny Alger incident that there's a revelation,
right?
And so there are these indications that this thing is at least on Joseph Smith's mind and is running around, even before Kirtland. And so what they're trying to do is, I think in saying this, by throwing this plural marriage in Kirtland and Nauvoo, is given the knowledge of this Fanny Alger incident, what they would like to do is have a revelation that exists beforehand in order to make it clear that is a plural marriage or a celestial marriage as opposed to an affair.
Right.
And so they'll get into it in the essay, of where they're trying to draw that revelation that's before the 1843 revelation that's D&C 132 in the LDS Doctrine and Covenants.
All right. Is maybe this will come up later, but is 132? What do you have in Community of Christ in your what is it called? Book of Commandments? Is it in there?
No, it's called the Doctrine and Covenants.
Yeah. Oh, okay. The Doctrine and Covenants.
The DNC 132, the LDS DNC 132 is not in our Doctrine and Covenants. We actually have the earlier Kirtland era section on marriage in the Community of Christ Doctrine and Covenants, and that's the one that I think it was in the LDS DNC until late.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually the 1870s that it gets pulled out. But it's another one of these examples of where that polygamy somehow must have been on people's mind or something like that, because in that one there's the phrase in that section of the Doctrine and Covenants, inasmuch as this Church of Christ has been tarred with charges of fornication and polygamy, we declare that marriage, the man, I'd have to get the quote
right.
exactly how it is, but that we don't practice polygamy or we don't believe in polygamy.
And what year was that written?
Let me So you're coming out of order because
Okay. So,
I don't have dates, but anyway, so I'll look it up. But anyway, I think it's 1835 because that is when the Doctrine and Covenant it's thrown in right at the end of the first publication of the D&C.
Yeah, because now Joseph personally had allegations of what would you call it? Being
infidelity.
Infidelity, yeah. Even really before Kirtland, right? There was something with Emma's cousin that he was accused of making overtures at her, if I'm remembering right.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ones. I mean, there's somebody who's made an article recently about all kinds of, like extremely early claims against Joseph Smith's reputation about that, and so there's a lot of those. I mean, because there's even before Fanny Alger, there's also the incident of the tarring and feathering too, where in the tarring and feathering, some of the sources of that are that they're coming to that they want to castrate him. Well, when you want to castrate somebody, it's because you're accusing him of adultery, right?
And that was when he and Sidney Rigdon were pulled out of Johnson's farm, and
right.
Yeah, okay. All right.
So it's the 1835 D&C, inasmuch as this Church of Christ has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy, we declare that we believe that one man should have one wife and one woman, one husband, except in the case of death, where either is at liberty to marry again. And so that's the section that's still in the Community of Christ D&C as opposed to 132.
Cool. All right. Well, who wants to kick off the first paragraph?
Sure, I got it.
All right, Matt.
Latter-day Saints believe that monogamy, the marriage of one man and one woman, is the Lord's standing law of marriage. In biblical times, the Lord commanded some of his people to practice plural marriage, the marriage of one man and more than one woman. Some early members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints also received and obeyed this commandment given through God's prophets.
So it's framed here as a commandment, even in Old Testament times. Now, aside from LDS Scripture, is there any place in the Old Testament that you guys are aware of that refer to this as a commandment? That
no,
right. This is just a cultural practice.
Was Abraham commanded to take Hagar though, and he had some reticence in doing it? No? Okay.
No, so the footnote here actually it takes you to that chapter. But if you read the chapter, it's Sarai that is giving the
the handmaiden.
She's the one that does it. What God's role is in the Old Testament text there is after Abraham has gone to the handmaiden, Sarah's gotten jealous, expelled the handmaiden, and so then the handmaiden's out in the desert. Then the Lord comes to the handmaiden to comfort her and say, and say that you're going to be a great nation too.
Right.
But it isn't. There's no commandment to Abraham to go do that.
And there's no reconciliation really between Abraham and Hagar afterwards. She kind of goes off and. Or does she reconcile with him?
I don't think so. There's a reconciliation there in the Bible, but I mean the texts are, anyway. So, but in any event, it's not commanded that Abraham do that, and it's not commanded that anybody else do it. So when other noted polygamists in the Bible like Solomon are taking all of these extra wives and concubines, this isn't the thing that has been commanded for them to do. And in fact, they're the prophets who were criticizing Solomon and David for doing those kind of things. So.
Yeah.
Well, the other citation there, just right in the first paragraph, is in the Book of Mormon, Jacob 2:27 and 30, where it says that, "For there shall be not any man among you have save it be one wife, and concubine he shall have none. For if I will, saith the Lord of hosts, raise up seed unto me, I will command my people, otherwise they shall hearken unto these things." And I think that's important to highlight here for what's coming.
I want to ask about the use of the word standing. I just thought that was such an interesting caveat. The marriage of one man, one woman is the Lord's standing law of marriage.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. We don't have to read into it that much, but I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about the use of that particular word.
It's the law of marriage for time, but not for eternity.
So it's the asterisk.
Yeah, it's the current. I mean, Is God consistent, the same today, yesterday, and forever, or not, if he has standing laws? His current law, but then, earlier he had a different law, later he might have a different law, but this is it right now.
Right, subject to change. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's a very
except for the
question.
DNC 132 says that this covenant is new and
right.
everlasting, right? And so, in other words, it can't be revoked according to a revelation from John Taylor, right?
Yeah, and I found it interesting. The reference to Abraham, even implied here, that if the God, let me see if I can get this right, if the God of Joseph Smith was also the God of Abraham, then Abraham would have actually killed Isaac. Right? Because he wasn't giving, and this comes up a little bit later on in the essay, but he wasn't giving Joseph Smith a test and then pulling it back and going, okay, you passed, you don't have to do this now. It's you're all in, you're going all the way. But anyway, so that was just a thought I had. Who wants to go after Matt?
I'll take this one.
All right.
After receiving a revelation commanding him to practice plural marriage, Joseph Smith married multiple wives and introduced the practice to close associates. This principle was among the most challenging aspects of the Restoration for Joseph personally, and for other members. Plural marriage tested faith and provoked controversy and opposition. Few Latter-day Saints initially welcomed the restoration of a biblical practice entirely foreign to their sensibilities, but many later testified of powerful spiritual experiences that helped them overcome their hesitation and gave them courage to accept this practice.
But they should have said few Latter-day Saint women initially welcomed the restoration. No.
Right, exactly. I mean, no. Everyone was a victim. Everybody was a victim of polygamy, this terrible thing.
Well, interesting. They call it a principle. The principle means something in the gospel. Certainly, what are the principles and ordinances of the gospel? To refer to it as a principle, I think highlights just how critical it is to the gospel, at least to the LDS doctrine.
Yeah, what do you hear in this paragraph, John?
Well, okay, so this is one of the places. So already now this is where we have this plural marriage in Kirtland and Nauvoo, because we are telescoping a lot of the issue here. So here we go. It's after receiving a revelation commanding him to practice plural marriage, Joseph married multiple wives and introduced the practice to close associates. Well, so it's not just a revelation here, because the revelation that we have as DNC 132, or the LDS Church has this DNC 132, is later than the practice. So the first incident that's in July 12th, 1843 that comes from. The first incident with Fanny Alger is 1836 or 1835 in Kirtland, and so then we're saying, and then introduce the practice to close associates, presumably the male associates. That's not until the early 1840s, so maybe 1842.
So, but John, my understanding was, so in 1843, Joseph Smith dictates 132 to, was it William Clayton and Hiram Smith? They were both present. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think so. Well, anyway, it was on Hiram's insistence.
Hiram's request. So, that saying, hey, look, if I know that Emma's opposed to plural marriage, but let me reason with her, and if you'll get a revelation from God, I'll take it to her and I'll reason with her, and that Joseph Smith, and I remember reading this in LDS.org Institute manual. It was the heading, so this is like LDS stuff that Joseph just rattled it off the top of his head. And they said, aren't you going to use the Urim and Thummim to get this from God? And Joseph's like, you know what? I got this a long time ago. I've heard this a lot. It's familiar to me. I can do it word for word. And so even though it was written down in 1843, his claim at the time, or at least the story, is that he got it earlier, and that's when the church will say probably as early as 1831, because they need to be able to say this opening statement. After receiving a revelation commanding him to do this, he started doing it. Yeah.
So, but I'm going to suggest as we go through this that what they're doing, therefore, is telescoping this all together in this essay, and so that this earlier revelation, we have some sources for it to confirm what that would have been about, and it is a different. It's different in particulars than what emerges in 1843, and so and I think we'll see that as we kind of go through this.
Hey, John, could I ask you just one? I don't want to be dense, but could you explain your use of the word telescoping?
Well, I meant to say that by colliding all of this together or alighting all of this together, after receiving a revelation commanding him to practice plural marriage, what do they mean there? Do they mean the 1831 one there, or do they mean the 1843 one there? Right. So
okay.
I think that there's a lot of places where that kind of ambiguity is happening in this essay. That's
okay.
Because they'd have to be referring to the 1831 in order for Fanny Alger to happen after that revelation.
Right. But then the second part of the sentence, and introduce the practice to close associates.
That's 1843.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So they're conflating those two incidents, right?
That's what I mean. Yeah, conflating is probably a better word than.
And then I think the last sentence here, that many people later testified of powerful spiritual experiences. If I understand this right, this happened at a time in Utah's history where there was conflict between, Brigham Young and the restored church, or not restored, the reorganized church with Joseph Smith Jr. Or the third, and so Brigham Young was having everyone write affidavits, and there was a bit of duress or maybe social pressure to create these narratives of spiritual experiences that were about 40 years after the fact. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know if they're only doing it out of pressure. I think that it's become so central to identity by Utah time that they and in Utah time, one of the things that ends up happening in the study of Mormon history is that there's all of this focus on persecution in the early church period, and everybody's very worried about all the persecution and everything like that. And I think that in some ways the early period doesn't have as good a examples of even though obviously Joseph Smith is killed and there's the Hans Mill massacre, but the overall total of what persecution is compared to how many Gentiles or how many non-Mormons are actually helping the early saints. Whereas when you get to the later 19th century in Utah and what the full weight of the federal government and all of this kind of thing, this is when the actual persecution is actually happening. This is when the actual crucible is happening that everybody's kind of being pressed through. And it's more or less all forgotten because people don't want to focus their persecution complex on the fact that they were doing it over their fight to the death to keep hold of polygamy, which they then gave up. So I think that they legitimately are feeling at that point in the later recollections and that there are spiritual experiences and courage and manifestations and everything that you're getting from being this persecuted minority out in Utah that is being subjected to what everybody sees as this outside attack from the federal government. So.
But isn't this just another way of saying that the people who practiced this received spiritual confirmation? So basically, don't question. You who didn't practice it don't really have standing to question their spiritual experience when those who practiced it received confirmation. That's my reading of that last line.
Sure.
Well, we can do it the other way. I mean, in the reorganized church, everybody received lots of spiritual experiences and confirmation that fighting polygamy was really important.
Right.
and they were really impressed with how wonderful their outpouring and manifestations of the Spirit were, revelations and everything else about how horrible these abominations were. And when you quoted that section of Jacob from the Book of Mormon, that was the masthead for the RLDS Saints Herald for the whole first 20, 30 years, So it was happening on both sides. There was spiritual confirmation for both parties.
Sure. I just think that's the point of putting that in there as a form of inoculation to the members of really don't question other people's spiritual experience who practiced it when you didn't. It's the same reason why they will point to a black member and just say, hey, if he doesn't question the priesthood ban, why should you?
Yeah.
I think that's a technique that they use on these controversial issues.
Yeah. So let me ask one more question from me on this paragraph, John. Are there 1844, 1845, that time frame accounts from that time that are these spiritual experiences, or are most of these spiritual experiences that they're referring to here coming from that later Utah period in the 1880s?
Boy, I guess from as they're going to even say in this essay that for the earliest time period, the records are pretty sparse because it's supposed to be kept really secret, and so I don't know. Maybe I don't know how many people are listing off. Yeah, boy, I've been taught the new and everlasting principle, and I had a spiritual confirmation of it in their journal in 1844. Mm-hmm. Just because people are keeping it, so I guess I'd say that I don't know offhand, so I can't say. But I'd imagine it's from later time period. But anyway.
Okay, all right. Okay.
I don't know what they're referring to. They don't have a footnote.
Right.
So I assume that they're right, that people have said, especially later, that they got spiritual confirmation and experiences that the fact that they overcame their initial hesitation was justified. So.
All right. Now, as you were talking there, John, your audio started getting a little fuzzy.
Oh, okay. I'm just trying to see if it's my internet. I moved my computer so that I could be hooked up to the without the wireless.
Yeah, right.
So,
okay.
Is it still doing it?
It's still a little bit. Do you guys hear it too, Matt, Jake?
Just a little bit. Fuzzy. It's not distracting me.
Okay. All right. Let's just keep going.
Matt's more fuzzy now to me. I don't know. Whatever. Let's just keep going.
I do need I need a shave. So.
All right.
Hey.
Okay. All right. I'll take.
But not your head because you're already bald.
I'll take paragraph 3, and then John, you can take the 4th, and then we'll keep cycling through. Okay. Next paragraph. Although the Lord commanded the adoption and later the cessation of plural marriage in the latter days, He did not give exact instructions on how to obey the commandment. That's your line, Matt. That's when you say anal. Okay, anyway.
Oh, stop.
That's your go-to. Okay.
Come on, Glenn.
Well,
can we be above that?
All right.
Class it up. Come on, class it up. We have a guest on. We have a guest on.
Okay,
come on.
Significant social and cultural changes often include misunderstandings and difficulties. Church leaders and members experienced these challenges as they heeded the command to practice plural marriage, and again later as they worked to discontinue it after Church President Wilford Woodruff issued an inspired statement known as the Manifesto in 1890, which led to the end of plural marriage in the church. That's a long sentence. Through it all, church leaders and members sought to follow God's will, which could probably be the single sentence that sums up the entire essay.
Yeah. Talk about fuzzy. Now, God's all fuzzy on this one.
Yeah. Maybe
I just don't understand what did, like, anyone who's read D&C 132, it seems pretty clear.
Hey guys,
what the rules are.
I've got to reset because everybody's audio is really bad right now.
Yeah, he's off.
Okay, so Jake, you were starting to respond to that third paragraph.
Right. Well, it just seems so. It just seems weird to say that the Lord did not give exact instructions on how to obey the commandment, because, I mean, if you look at D&C 132, it's almost absurd how detailed it is. You know, it gives very specific rules about who the husband can espouse and who he needs, you know, the wife's permission, except which she won't give it, and then he can just fucking do it anyway. And it seems pretty specific, right?
Don't you think they're talking
way more
about
specific
sex right here?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that what it is? It's whether or not this is going to include coitus or not.
Oh, I hope not. Is that what they mean?
No, I think you're right. I mean, they're trying to cover something here, and I think the question is, what are they trying to cover? And maybe it is because they go on a little later to say there's there's two different types of eternal or celestial marriage. There's one that's for time and eternity, which would include sex, and then there's time, which is just, or the marriage that's just for eternity, which is non-sexual. So maybe that's what they're trying to set up here, that God didn't really say which one of those two it was supposed to be, so they were a little sloppy with it.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that's not, as Jake points out, not really explicitly said. I mean, obviously everybody knows what we're talking about when we talk about marriage.
If a man espouse a virgin, and I don't know, that's not explicit. I don't know.
It does seem very explicit.
And this is why I find it disingenuous as they come in later. But I think that's what they mean. But again, read this in context with Jacob, and the only reason why it's justified is to raise up seed,
procreative.
Yeah. So it seems that's the only thing that I can point to as to what they're trying to fudge or kind of make unclear, because what else in the practice is not clear.
Right. I mean, I'm looking through D&C 132. There's there's a specific justification for why it used to exist, and now, but then it didn't, but now it's existing again, and who they can marry, and even though Joseph Smith didn't follow those rules, I don't know.
I think the main one is the sex no sex part, but it also may be that if you go all the way back to Kirtland, then these celestial marriages were happening outside of the temple and like the sealing power and the sealing ceremonies that we have today. So maybe that was part of it, that Joseph was having these marriages and maybe others that were performed or sealed in different ways than we have today. Maybe that's part of it.
Well, it could be.
What do you think, John?
All right.
Well, actually, when I kind of was with Jake when they were saying this part of it, I was immediately thinking that they're talking about the instructions in D&C 132. But now that you mention the Kirtland portion of this, then actually, I mean, going back to it again by conflating these two different things, which is the 1831 idea of it, or a revelation, if it was a revelation of it, or whatever you want to call it, and then the D&C 132 one, they're very different. So.
Could another part of this be justification or muddying the water so that provide a space to explain why he married women that were already married?
Yeah, that's a good point too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, that makes
sense. Because that right, because that's another wrinkle in this thing.
I mean, I think it does give things about that, because he's supposed to espouse virgins.
Right. Obviously,
I think that actually does give I don't know. What does it say? It doesn't give specific exact instructions. It's an exact instruction. So I don't know.
Right. Well, I mean, it is an instruction there, but like the way that they explain it later, and we'll get there, is Joseph Smith was marrying women who are already married as like a loophole. That's kind of how they present it. So maybe, I don't know if that's what they're trying to set up here. I don't know.
I think they could. The thing that I'm reminded of is the Truman Madsen lectures on Joseph Smith, where he talks about when Joseph first introduces the idea of sealing, and how people were running out without order and men being sealed.
This was baptism for the dead, right?
Oh, you're right. It was baptism for dead, not sealing. You're right. And men were doing it for women, and women for men, and there was just chaos. And so, I assume that's true, but maybe this is kind of an homage to that as it pertains to sealing. Is just kind of what Jake's saying, and what. The more it can be muddied, I guess, the more it can be how can we all make sense of this when nobody even then really understood it? I don't know.
Joseph was just confused when he married other women's wives. That wasn't the idea. That was it. God just didn't make the instructions exact enough when he said virgin.
Yeah, I think it's just a nice smoke screen that you can hide a multitude of indiscretions behind. Because if you say God didn't give specific reasons, or specific whatever, then you give Joseph and others almost carte blanche to do whatever they did, and whatever they did was okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to push pause before we move on to the next one and go back to a couple things you said, John, about the earlier 1831 revelation, if it was a revelation, compared to the 1843, Section 132. Are there? I mean, is there a source, or are there indications that there was some kind of a 1831 revelation aside from what D&C 132 says about it, that Joseph was asking about the Old Testament prophets? What might that be? Yeah.
So there's a couple indications that there was something that was going on as early as 1831. It's clearly, as we've already even mentioned in the book of the reference in the book of Jacob, it's something that's on Joseph Smith's mind, right? As of even 1829, when the Book of Mormon's being composed. So there's something he's thinking about. But as of 1831, there is we have a later recollection from W.W. Phelps where he remembers an 1831, what he's calling an 1831 revelation, where he kind of as their first idea in the early church is that they're going to go convert all of the Lamanites. They're going to convert all the Indians. The purpose of the Book of Mormon is to bring the Lamanites a history that will bring them to Christ, so that they will be able to participate in the end times, which are immediate and imminent. And so it would what was written in W.W. Phelps' recollection is this is the revelation. It is Jesus Christ's will. It is His will that in time ye should take unto you wives of the Lamanites and Nephites, that their posterity may become white and delightsome and just. For even now their females are more virtuous than the Gentiles. And so, in other words, the Lamanite missionary. The missionaries to the Lamanites are going to have Lamanite Indian and Native American wives, and that's going to fulfill the Book of Mormon prophecy of making Native Americans white and delightsome through breeding with people or having families with W.W. Phelps and all of the other missionaries. And so Phelps also said about 3 years later, which would be around 1834, I asked Brother Joseph privately how we, meaning the people mentioned in the Revelation, were to take wives of the natives, as we were already married men. Yeah. He replied instantly, in the manner that Abraham took Keturah, and also Jacob took Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah by revelation. The saints of the Lord are always directed by revelation. So there's this idea that Phelps is recalling that, in concert with the initial Lamanite mission, that there's going to be polygamy, at least in terms of maybe Phelps already has his first wife, his Sarah, or his Leah, but then he can have additional wives, Keturah and Hagar, and all that, like in the biblical precedent. And then there's another example for that's more contemporary, where Ezra Booth, who is an early member who leaves the church and writes a bunch of kind of scathing letters that get published in Howe's Mormonism Unveiled, kind of the first anti-Mormon book.
Right.
Pretty much great letters. And it tells us a lot about early Mormonism. So Ezra Booth's letters, he mentions this same prophecy. And so that's pretty, there's an insider idea and an outsider idea, and it also fixes with the Book of Mormon ideas, which is kind of like, in other words, Joseph Smith's thinking at the time. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know.
But that's very different from Nauvoo. In other words, Nauvoo polygamy. In other words, this is an idea of concubinage.
Right.
So this is an idea of Hagar and Keturah and Zilpah and Bilhah. In other words, these guys are going to have additional handmaiden kind of polygamy. There's no idea here of time and all eternity and all that kind of thing.
Well, but perhaps that was just the context where Joseph shared it. It was geared more towards concubines, even though. I don't know.
I'm just telling you, we don't have any evidence of it being the later practice at the earlier time.
Yeah.
So that's why I say that part of the problem here is deciding that it's all the same thing.
Right.
Is that it becomes messy.
Did the idea of eternal marriage or sealing or anything like that exist in this time period, or is there evidence of that, or was that a later Nauvoo period addition?
So my understanding of all that is that it's later, and it's not necessarily as late as Nauvoo polygamy, but there's some indication that, like, I don't know when it is, but 1839 or 40, that Joseph Smith is talking to Parley B. Pratt about sealing for eternity and not that kind of thing. And so that's starting to be formulated later, which is more around the time maybe as when the ideas of baptism for the dead and that kind of thing are being, formulated. So it is. That's not 1831. That's not in the Book of Mormon anywhere. That kind of stuff.
Right. And so in this 1834 account from Phelps and that Ezra Booth recounted, if Joseph Smith's talking about Abraham and multiple wives, that's a marriage for time in his mind, or at least in the context of that time, because they haven't even started thinking about eternity or that Abraham's still sealed to these wives.
He's not even thinking of it for time because he's never thought of it as marriage for time. I'm just saying that's
it's just a concubine.
Thinking of it about marriage for time is something that you later come up with when you've thought of marriage for eternity.
Okay.
Right, making that type of relative statement about it implies that there's another option. If they had never conceptualized that other option, then they wouldn't think of it as a marriage for time.
Well, and I'm kind of going back and superimposing marriage for time on what they may have thought of as just marriage.
Oh, right. Got it. All right. Got it.
Yeah. All right. Should we move on to 4?
Wasn't Joseph Smo theologically to shoehorn in Old Testament concepts and taking sometimes obscure Old Testament stuff and saying, here's what this means today? And isn't that another form of that? Saying, yeah, they had concubines, so let me explain how that's still restored today. And that seems to, at least, and I could be completely off on that, but it seems that that's a form of that with that that thing that you were just reading or talking about is in 1834.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I think that he's a dynamic innovator, but it isn't that he just makes it up ex nihilo. He hears things, he reads things, he's busily studying the Old Testament. He sees something in the Old Testament that sparks an idea, and he definitely has been thinking about polygamy from pretty early on. So,
Yeah, and he's a tour guide who's always taking people through a tour of God's plan and trying to connect the God of the Old Testament to their contemporary circumstances. But anyway, Okay. So let's go on with number 4.
Okay. Many details about the early practice of plural marriage are unknown. Plural marriage was introduced among the early saints incrementally, and participants were asked to keep their actions confidential. They did not discuss their experiences publicly or in writing until after the Latter-day Saints had moved to Utah and church leaders had publicly acknowledged the practice. The historical record of early plural marriage is therefore thin. Few records of the time provide details, and later reminiscences are not always reliable. Some ambiguity will always accompany our knowledge about this issue. Like the participants, we, quote, see through a glass darkly and are asked to walk by faith.
I think that's pretty spot on. I mean, to me, that kind of comes to the crux of, like when I first realized that in order for me to continue being Mormon, I had to accept the idea that God was behind polygamy, and it wasn't just, Joseph, the, foibles of men, or, the weakness of men or weakness of the flesh or something, but this really was God saying, you've got to do this. And I'm being asked to walk by faith. That was just a walk I couldn't do. I couldn't imagine that God or a God would command something like that. So I couldn't. I didn't have faith strong enough for that. But are there things in this paragraph that strike any of you as being off base or spinning again?
Well, I think we said some of these things. In other words, that the historical record is thin because the people didn't want to write about it and everything like that. On the other hand, history isn't only written by the people who stayed loyal to Brigham Young in Utah. In other words, there is actually a significant amount of contemporary evidence in the form of exposés and people who were spilling their guts and people who were the gossip and all that kind of thing. And so we actually know a fair amount about the contemporary practice of polygamy in Nauvoo because of insiders who told other people. But that's just being discounted here as, not even mentioned. But, in other words, this anti-Mormon stuff.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because one of the things I thought about when I first read this was the the story of Nancy Rigdon, and when Joseph proposed to her, and he wrote the letter, and we've got a lot of that. How maybe, I don't know, John, if you could summarize what happened there and how reliable that story is with Nancy Rigdon, because to me that was so damning for the personality of Joseph Smith.
Yeah, there's actually several of these kind of examples where we have kind of the negative examples. So we have the examples that are positive from the positive sources, where people later take it as like a faith promoting test or something like that. So like the Violet Kimball story, where Joseph Smith comes and asks Heber C. Kimball for his wife, and then Heber says, "Oh, that's fine, you can have her," and then Joseph's like, "Oh, that was just a test, like Abraham." But then there are other ones where like the Orson Pratt's wife, where the test doesn't go through, or William Law's wife, where Joseph is kind of rebuffed in his advances, and then the person has to be, kind of venomously scapegoated, and at the time, which is what usually happened whenever anybody didn't go along or became separated with the early church people. So they would yell at each other and say horrible things about each other. So I guess in that case, what happened with Nancy Rigdon is kind of in between, where there's a proposition like a lot of these other propositions, but the Rigdons decide that they're going to continue to collaborate, but they aren't going to participate, and so as a result, there's kind of like an uneasy situation. But Rigdon isn't coming out, against what Joseph Smith is doing the way William Law did because of the propositions against William Law's wife, and so instead, what ends up happening is that Nancy's story is exposed, I think, by Bennett, and so then everybody's in the position of having to deny the scandal.
Now, if I remember right, and just so everyone knows, Randy's just joined. Hello, Randy. Are you there, Randy?
I'm just listening now.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So as you're listening, if you could pull up the essay on LDS.org, we're looking at the plural marriage in Kirtland and Nauvoo. And are
you going paragraph?
Yeah,
you're going paragraph by paragraph. Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll be reading the fifth one. So you're just in time for your paragraph. But what I remember about the Nancy Rigdon story is it was set up by a woman who was already involved in plural marriage that was in. I think Joseph had married her while her husband was away, if I remember right, and it was kind of a punishment for him opposing the apostle opposed. Was it Orson Hyde? Maybe, I don't remember. Pratt? No, it was Sarah Pratt. Right?
Yeah, Pratt.
Yeah. It was Sarah Pratt who arranged the meeting between Joseph and Nancy, and when Joseph made his intentions clear, she rebuffed him, and then he wrote a letter to her trying to convince her yet again. And I think we have a copy of that letter because I saw it in Van Wagoner's book on Sidney Rigdon, and there's this quote that he gives that I think the church still uses totally out of context in certain situations, along the lines of, if people only knew that God was really much more liberal than people really expect. And he was using this as an argument to say, Nancy, come on, this really is God that's wanting to do this. And she still refused. And then he turned on her and accused her of being a harlot and having an affair with John C. Bennett and all kinds of nasty things, and just like immediately got awful with her. So when I first saw
that was the normal thing that they would do. So like they were like all best of friends, including Bennett. Yeah. So Bennett is Joseph Smith's best friend, for this whole long time, and collaborator and everything like that. And so now he's remembered as a demon because once there's a break, then everybody wrote just horrifically scathing things and tried to demonize each other. And in some cases, that's the way it's remembered. And in some cases, the people ended up trying to reconcile. And so that's like a situation like with the Rigdon family where they were reconciled to Joseph Smith before his death.
So I guess, you can't really expect the church to be balanced in these early sources that they're talking about, because they do acknowledge you're supposed to walk by faith, and they're not going to put anything out there that is going to challenge people's faith. But, to ignore it like this is pretty disingenuous. So.
Well, it says here the historical record of plural marriage. So in other words, we're talking about what the historical record is. And so the historical record includes people who didn't follow Brigham Young to Utah.
Right.
So.
Yeah. All right. So, Randy, you are the next paragraph right after the beginnings of plural marriage in the church.
All right. Well, man, I can't really talk out of my ass with John Hamer here.
I'm sure you'll find a way.
Oh, I'm doing it.
He'll be able to cite sources that show that I'm wrong when I make silly
naked assertions.
Yeah, naked assertions. I love
out of your ass.
Out of my ass. All right. The revelation.
We're trying to go with a complete swear version, Randy. Thanks.
Oh. we're trying to go with PG.
No.
Dag nabbit.
Don't worry about it.
All right. So this is the beginnings of plural marriage in the church section of the article. The revelation on plural marriage was not written down until 1843, but its early verses suggest that part of it emerged from Joseph Smith's study of the Old Testament in 1831. People knew Joseph well. People who knew. Editing.
I'm not going to edit this. I'm just going to push it out tomorrow.
Yeah, right.
Seriously.
He's not kidding.
I'm not kidding.
As per your MO. All right. People who knew Joseph well later stated he received the revelation about that time. The revelation recorded in Doctrine and Covenants 132 states that Joseph prayed to know why God justified Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, and Solomon in having many wives. The Lord responded that he had commanded them to enter into the practice. With a footnote.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit already, but it's an interesting wordplay here that Joseph asks why God allowed it, why God justified it, and God came back and said, "Oh no, I didn't just allow it; I commanded it, buddy."
Yeah.
This and the whole story of the angel with the flaming sword. I hate coming into the conversation.
That's coming. Where there's going to be paragraphs where they're talking about the angel with the flaming sword.
Yeah, but it like totally paints Joseph as a victim. Like God is just forcing him to do this thing he really doesn't want to do.
Yep.
And
you don't believe that, do you?
That's not very plausible.
Right.
So one of the things I'm thinking here again is that they actually don't want to write out this. They don't want to write out this 1831 revelation that they're wanting to indicate existed, right?
Yeah,
and it does exist. We haven't. Do we have the actual document?
No, we don't. But we have. They're wanting to say it exists, and so in saying it exists, though, they don't want to say the text that we have, which we don't have the text of it. We have Phelps's later recollection of what the text was, and I read that before, which is that you're gonna marry Lamanites' wives and make the race white and delightsome. So obviously they don't want to bring that up, right?
Well, the alleged 1831 revelation is a matter of conjecture, right?
Well, it's pretty good, actually. I mean, everything's conjecture, but anyway, I was thinking it's a pretty good conjecture because Phelps, who is an internal positive source, remembers it, and he remembers it in some detail in the context of it, which is this: you're going to marry all these Lamanite concubines, and then there's an ex-Mormon or an anti-Mormon source, Ezra Booth, who contemporaneously earlier than right around 1831, I think he probably is writing to Eber D. Howe, and it gets published in Mormonism Unveiled, where he relates the exact same prophecy. So it's pretty good because there's negative and positive recollection of it.
So now when we're talking about an 1831 revelation, we don't mean something that was written down per se, but just that Joseph claimed to receive this commandment from God in response to his question. That they say here. Why did God justify these prophets to practice a plural marriage?
Well, so the thing of it was that he said to Phelps is, it's his will that in time you shall take unto you wives of the Lamanites and Nephites, that their posterity may become white and delightsome and just, for even now their females are more virtuous than the Gentiles. So it's Indian men that suck, marry their women, and you'll make them into good Caucasians.
Yep.
That's the basis of this claim of 1831.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what I'm saying is disingenuous, that they want to claim this earlier revelation in order to, solemnize the Fanny Alger affair.
Right.
But in so doing, they don't want to give us the text of it, right?
Yeah.
Right, and they don't. Yeah, there's no footnotes for it either. In fact, the only way that they talk about it, the only context whatsoever they give of it is that in D&C 131, he alludes to Old Testament stuff and studying the Old Testament in the past.
Right.
But you're saying that there's a much more specific, pointed source, but since it's so racist, implicitly racist, they're not actually linking to it or referencing it directly.
Yeah, it's like that Braveheart scene where the king wants to institute, what is it?
Prima
Whatever.
nocta.
Prima nocta, yeah.
Okay, by the way, that does not happen. That is not history. There is no prima nocta in all of history. And nothing in Braveheart is true.
Yeah, I actually read that.
Braveheart is one of the most egregious abortions of history of any film ever made. Maybe other than The Passion of the Christ.
It's a good movie, so back off.
One thing I want to say in Joseph Smith's defense, though, is that Fanny Alger was 1/4 Cherokee.
Well, there you go.
No, I don't know. I'm just making it. Everybody's like got 1/13th Cherokee.
1/16th.
Yeah.
I'm 1/256th.
See? There you go. So Joseph Smith, look out.
Yep.
So John, I have a question for you. Pardon if this has already been brought up or will be brought up later in the article. Obviously, you believe that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon, and with a little help, but pretty much was the primary author. So I want you to astral project Joseph Smith when he wrote Jacob chapter 2.
Yep.
What was his mindset then? Do you think? Were these ideas already percolating in his mind?
Yeah, no, I have said that already. So in other words, I think that it's clear that he's got this idea on the mind, and so in other words, that's a reference that we can see it as early as 1829. He's composing that into the Book of Mormon. There's this again 1831 prediction about polygamy among the Indians. And then we also have all kinds of early references to, infidelity. So I think that there's every reason to imagine that he has thinking about this.
And I think it's another indication of the Book of Mormon, at least regardless of the authorship, but the Book of Mormon as a 19th century creation where monogamy is the standard. And you've got to have some justification for why these ancient prophets were justified in the eyes of God practicing polygamy. So it's built into the narrative in Jacob 2. Even if it's not projecting forward as to what Joseph Smith wants to do, at the very least, it's giving these prophets a pass and saying, well, in those cases, God wanted to raise up seed. But mostly it's just monogamy, everyone.
Yeah, well,
that's the standing law.
Yeah, right. God's standing law right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, because there's one verse towards the beginning of the chapter which basically condemns Solomon for which thing is abominable. Right. So was that just him expressing angst for even thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that. In other words, that he's wrestling with it. He's thinking about the idea. He's saying, no, it's an abomination. But then he's saying, well, unless I command it. So he gives him his way out. And then I think there's another verse that comes after that and says, but then it still wasn't particularly justified. So yeah, I think that it's kind of a thing where he's wrestling with a something that's in the Bible that's taken his fancy. He's thinking about it. He can't help but think about it somehow, maybe. And
his libido.
I don't know why. I'm not saying why he's thinking about it. Anyway, he is thinking about it, and so therefore he's dwelling on it, and therefore it comes out in his composition. So,
okay. And he has to account David and what's his name? Is it Uriah or?
No, it's David and Uriah with Bathsheba.
Yeah, that whole thing, and he knows that was condemned, and so they're given unto him. Except for this one, this one's bad. Yeah.
All right, Matt. Let's go with the next paragraph.
Yeah. The sealing of husband and wife for eternity was made possible by the restoration of priesthood keys and ordinances.
Is that right?
What are you reading?
I think it's Latter-day Saints Understood.
Oh shit! Sorry.
Yeah, you were like way off.
I was trying to get through this thing quick, bro. Blah, blah, blah. Let's jump to it. Latter-day Saints understood that they were living in the latter days, in what the Revelations called the dispensation of the fullness of times. Ancient principles, such as prophets, priesthood, and temples, would be restored to earth. Plural marriage was one of those ancient principles.
Yeah, and I think we discussed this earlier around principles, that it wasn't really a principle, it was just something that was there in the Old Testament narrative, right?
Well, what is a principle? Like, what does that word even mean in a gospel context? Like,
something you have to do to get to heaven.
Immutable.
Okay, immutable is
versus,
something you have to go.
Versus a policy, right? You got principles and then you have policies. And policies might enforce or help to enforce principles. Is that?
I think they're using it here to mean what Mormons mean as doctrine, right?
Yeah.
So
okay.
Yeah.
Doctrine,
beliefs or teachings or practices in this case. And
we talked about it, which is that it's not a commandment as opposed to what it was said earlier in this essay, but what they're saying here is Latter-day Saints understood that they were thinking all those things, and so yeah, the people in the 1830s did think this kind of thing. Yeah. So that part of it is actually that framing of this makes it correct.
So to them it was a principle.
Well, for them, they're reading it. It was happening. They're seeing it, and they also definitely believe. They also all believed that they're living in the dispensation of the fullness of times, because they literally in 1831 anyway, they believed that the whole thing was going to end in 3 years. So they really thought that they were not only in the latter days, they were in the end, and so yeah.
Okay, so
let me ask this: Did you all ever hear the idea that everything does have to be restored as part of the restoration? Everything has to be restored. For example, I had an institute teacher who taught that even animal sacrifice at some point would have to be restored for a period of time in order for the full restoration to come and for Jesus to come back. Has anyone else heard that?
Yeah, but where does genocide come in? Does genocide need to be restored?
Maybe.
Because the Old Testament's replete with stories of genocide.
Yeah, but that already happened when the colonization of Utah, when the Indians got massacred.
Right.
So it's already done.
Yeah, check that box. Check the genocide box.
Anyway, so is this? I wonder if this is kind of whoever's right. If it is a person with either historical or has a certain doctrinal perspective, if that is something that people believe, is this a reference to that? It's just, look, it has to be done as part of the restoration. This is necessary. It doesn't really explain why that's necessary. Just that, as part of the restoration, this has to be a part of it.
Well, maybe it's part of this whole idea of when they use the word the standing laws, monogamy, and then later on they talk about the fact that plural marriage can still happen in the eternities because of the way that temple sealings are set up. Maybe it's this idea that this is a principle, but it's just put on hold. It's been put on hold, but it hasn't been undone necessarily.
Yeah, because his standing law is putting the principle on hold.
Okay, all right.
But the principle had to be restored.
This is a huge example of the power of metaphor. So the fact that they've come up with this word restoration, and it's not just them that made it up. I mean, this is what the Stone Campbell movement, the Disciples of Christ, the Churches of Christ, they've all come up with this word restoration, which is this idea that's beyond Reformation. We've had a Reformation, but now we need to restore the primitive church that's been lost. And when the first people are saying that, when Alexander Campbell and everybody are theorizing that, what they're trying to do is base everything on biblical precedent only. And so they just want to read what's in the Bible, and exactly what's in the Bible, they're going to restore that. But now that we've got this idea of restoration, now this is the restoration, now suddenly this power of metaphor takes off like crazy. Now we got to restore everything, so.
Yeah, and in fact, you can restore things that the Bible doesn't explicitly say. But, it talks about stars, moons, and sun at some place, so we're going to turn that into degrees of glory. And, hey, guys, guess what? That's actually a restoration that was taken out of the Bible. You open yourself up for all of these explanations that... anyway.
Yeah, but the funny thing is that polygamy was not something... If you look at the history of Judaism... Obviously, I mean, who was more rule-based than the Jews, the ancient Jews? And polygamy didn't make it through the hundreds of years. So polygamy really wasn't a theological principle. It probably was more of a cultural thing. And so it's just mentioned in the Bible, but the Mormons then take that and run with it.
Okay, let me ask Matt's question again then. Did you ever hear this one, that when Moses went up to get the Ten Commandments, what he first came down with was the restored gospel, like the endowment ceremony, everything that Mormons had. But he saw them worshiping.
That's what he smashed.
Yeah. He saw them worshiping the calf. He smashed it. He went back up, and God goes, "Oh, damn it! All right, look, I'm going to give you a lesser law." And here, and so, like what you're saying, Randy, about the Jews, the Jews didn't have it, but before Moses. They did. I mean, David kind of falls apart. Solomon kind of falls apart under that one. But I heard this. I remember hearing that.
Oh yeah, I heard it.
Celestial marriage.
Right. This is the temple. The Solomon's temple was a bastardized form of the real temple ceremony, which we have today.
Yeah. So, all right. Jake, you're next.
Oh, that's me. All right. Polygamy has been permitted for millennia in many cultures and religions, but with few exceptions was rejected in Western cultures. In Joseph Smith's time, monogamy was the only legal form of marriage in the United States. Joseph knew the practice of plural marriage would stir up public ire. After receiving the commandment, he taught a few associates about it, but he did not spread his teaching widely in the 1830s. Honestly, this paragraph seems like it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Right.
Except if he really had a problem with it, how do you explain Fanny Alger?
Well, and this whole paragraph destroys the idea of traditional marriage, which is used all the time against gay marriage.
Yeah.
That's true, and it's one of the stops on that slippery slope is polygamy in a lot of cases. And I've heard Mormons make that argument too, which is really ironic. But it didn't say that he has in this paragraph. It doesn't say that he had a problem with it. He just knew it would stir up public ire, and so he kept it on the L.
Yeah. So he was secretive and he lied about it, is what it should say.
It was very deliberate denials. I don't know. There's some phrase later on.
They're going to come to that. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
All right.
Sorry.
I love the citation. The citation of that last sentence is the deposition of Lorenzo Snow in the Temple Lot case.
Whoa.
Number 8?
Yeah. Why would that? Why would that be relevant to the deposition in the Temple Lot case?
Maybe because Lorenzo Snow mentioned Joseph Smith telling him about it at an early time.
No, I think the Temple Lot case was him backpedaling a lot on polygamy and the practice of polygamy, wasn't it?
No, it's
Oh, all right.
the Temple.
That's why we have an expert.
Yeah, exactly.
The Temple Lot case is this incredible thing. So it's this it's like the last moment when all of the first generation of early Mormons are still alive, and there's this lawsuit that is between the Community of Christ, between the RLDS Church at the time and the Church of Christ Temple Lot, to see, the RLDS Church is trying to take control of the portion of the Temple Lot that the Church of Christ Temple Lot owns. And so the LDS Church joins on the side of the Church of Christ Temple Lot in order to fight the RLDS Church in court. And so the entire thing becomes this thing where suddenly under oath in the Victorian era, all early Mormons spill their guts about early Mormon polygamy and try to make it be as physical and literal as possible. So, within the bounds of Victorian propriety, the ladies are explaining that yes, they did have sex with Joseph Smith, that kind of thing. So it's in order to shame Joseph Smith III in the RLDS Church, whose position was that Joseph Smith hadn't been involved in this and that it was something that Brigham Young made up. So, So as a result of this as a result of this fight, we have under oath, under affidavit, all of these people, these early members, from different swipes of Mormonism too. So the LDS Church, Church of Christ Temple Exohedrikites, we have Strangites that are testifying. We have the Josephites, the RLDS people, and so we have like people like William Smith who are just lying like crazy under oath, saying no, I never practiced polygamy, even though we practiced polygamy. So anyway, so it's a really interesting document. So
wow.
John, would you recommend the book Mission to Madness?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
So they cover a lot of this in that. I know that there's references to that in that book, and I've heard from a number of people that that's a great snapshot of what's going on here with the pull of the Brighamite Church trying to effectively convert Joseph Smith III. Is that right?
David Hiram.
Smith. Okay, David Hiram. David Hiram Smith. That's right.
Yeah, so Joseph Smith's posthumous son, David Hiram, who's a very sensitive guy, who's an artist and a poet, and he's written hymns that are still in our hymnal, in the Community of Christ hymnal. But he's also we don't know. He has a longtime male friend. We don't know. Anyway, he also ultimately has a nervous breakdown. Yeah,
right.
So this
plug for that.
What was
great book?
What was it called again?
Val Avery, she's one of the biographers of Mormon Enigma, along with Linda King Newell. Yeah. It's an award-winning book, Val Avery's biography of David Hiram Smith from Mission to Madness.
Cool.
There you go. Not just a pretty face, Glenn.
All right. Who, you?
Yeah, I know things. Right. I know stuff.
Nice. Right.
So this paragraph really makes me think of when I was living in Bloomington, I had a few chances to listen to Jan Ships, who's one of the premier non-Mormon scholars.
Yeah.
And there was one presentation where she gave that was really interesting. It talked about how the perception of Mormonism had changed really radically since between like the 1890s to like the 1950s.
Right.
In that earlier period, Mormons were seen as like just incredibly sexually active and promiscuous and these just nonstop debauchery with all their wives and this very sexualized culture. That's how they were portrayed. And it just seems so interesting that how it's been turned around now to we're now seen as the epitome of chastity and the button down. I mean, we're Mormonism is a trope in cop movies now of like people who won't do stuff. It'll be like, what are you, a Mormon or whatever. that comes up a lot, but it just seems so interesting that in this first paragraph where they talk about how polygamy was rejected in Western cultures but was received in other cultures, how interesting that is now that the current version of Mormonism is so such a caricature of like 1950s American Western culture. It's just the all-American religion now. But it wasn't always that way.
And I think I think the very first Sherlock Holmes story was a demonizing piece about Mormons in that vein that you're talking about, us like these sexual predators that are taking women from London to Salt Lake. Sherlock Holmes, baby.
Yeah,
it's a study in Scarlet.
Right.
It's the initial Sherlock Holmes story, and like you say, it's just an anti-Mormon. But because the connection there, which was constantly being made, is between the Mormons as the others. So they're just like the Turk with the seraglio, with the harem, and so that was definitely a trope of 19th century understanding of Mormons. And like you say, like Jan Shipp's research, what she did was she systematically went through like all the news stuff before there was computers and databases, and she did, or maybe the very first computers, and tabulated all of that to kind of show this incredible transformation from being this, like you say, hypersexualized other, these people who were just had no values that were understood to us, to then by us being other North Americans who aren't Mormons. And then to this change in the post-war period where Mormons are actually the model minority. They're the people that take care of their own. They're the industrious ones, all that kind of thing. And it's just complete transformation of the public perception.
Yeah. Right.
I've always understood that as they had a significant drop in convert baptisms because of this negative image. and they needed an overhaul in their image. And right about that time that they realized, because they're coming out of polygamy. You don't come out of polygamy overnight. It took them a couple of decades to get out of that. And right about that time was the temperance movement. And then that's when they kind of harkened back, hey, we got this word of wisdom thing. And so then they became the teetotalitarians, the teetotalers.
I like that word.
That's a great word.
Yes.
The teetotalers. And then the 50s came, and then you had the Cold War, and they became like uber American. And
like counterculture.
And then the 60s came, and then they became counterculture. And it was just kind of this momentum of trying to restore the image, and now it's culminated in Meet the Mormons.
It's all been leading up to that.
Exactly.
All right.
The Mormon moment.
Okay, next paragraph. I've got it. When God commands a difficult task, he sometimes sends additional messengers to encourage his people to obey. Like in the case of Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And he sent, never mind, just trust us, he does. Okay. Consistent. What's that? Yeah, right. Consistent with this pattern, Joseph told associates that an angel appeared to him 3 times between 1834 and 1842 and commanded him to proceed with plural marriage when he hesitated to move forward. During the 3rd and final appearance, because everything happens in 3s, the angel came with a drawn sword, threatening Joseph with destruction unless he went forward and obeyed the command fully.
All the way.
All the way.
It is such a difficult task. It's such a difficult task to be asked to fuck other women. That I would hate for that to be commanded to me by God.
Yeah.
I would hate it.
Yeah.
With a drawn sword, no less.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's not like a Freudian vision.
Right. Yeah, right.
What was on his mind when he's having visions? I don't know.
Yeah, so is there? I mean, I kind of made light of this, but that first sentence, that there's a pattern, that God follows when he has a difficult task. Like, where the hell is that coming from?
Well, like Jonah. Like when Jonah, what does God do? He like makes a big storm and sends a big fish, right?
What about Job?
It's a pattern.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Moses had a difficult task, and he got the burning bush, so you got the flaming sword.
There's so many sexual references.
Combine the flaming bush with the flaming sword. Yeah. That's an STD.
Yeah. So, okay, all right. Anything more with this paragraph, or should we move on?
Well, I think we already talked about it. It's like, poor Joseph, he's persecuted. He didn't want to do any of this. So.
Yeah.
Right. This whole this thing, it is pretty
reluctant obedience.
Insidious. It is pretty insidious how they paint him as a victim of all of this. Like. Right. I don't know. It just seems like who else would benefit from this? Like he's the number one benefactor. It's like, such a victim.
Yeah.
No.
All right, John.
Fragmentary evidence suggests that Joseph Smith acted on the angel's first command by marrying a plural wife, Fanny Alger, in Kirtland, Ohio, in the mid-1830s. Several Latter-day Saints. You want to what?
I'm just saying he fucked the babysitter. Go ahead.
Several Latter-day Saints who had lived in Kirtland reported decades later that Joseph Smith had married Alger, who lived and worked in the Smith household after he obtained her consent and that of her parents. Little is known about this marriage other than the fact that I guess he got the consent of the parents.
Yeah, right.
Where does that come in? That's completely made up.
Let's make sure we get this clear of this fragmentary evidence.
Little is known about this marriage other than the fact that Oliver Cowdery called it a filthy, nasty, dirty affair.
Yeah. And
nothing is known about the conversations between Joseph and Emma regarding Alger other than the fact that she threw her out of the house.
Yeah.
After the marriage with Alger ended in separation. Oh, so sad. How did that separation come about? They didn't get along. Anyway, Joseph seems to have set the subject of plural marriage aside until after the church moved to Nauvoo, Illinois.
But no, there were others before Nauvoo. But anyway, so Let's unpack the fanny a little bit. The fanny pack. Anyway, that's stupid. So what?
I know, but is it not perfect that her name is Fanny, the first one?
Absolutely. So what was she? Was there an actual ceremony that was performed that made this a marriage?
I don't think there's anybody who has a recollection of that, as far as I know.
Okay, I
That's
thought
not argued.
Maybe I'll have to go back and look at Rustone Rolling. I think that Bushman says something in there about her uncle, but that's going from memory. I could be wrong. That actually performed a marriage.
Is that Louisa Beeman with in Nauvoo?
No. Yeah, I remember that was the one where she dressed up like a man. But I thought I remembered something about Kirtland, but I don't know how valid it is because it, like we said in the very first paragraph, they've got to go back to the very beginning and claim that he had a revelation and God was behind this, and it was all legit from the start. So of course there has to be a ceremony before there's any physical interaction or a relationship that develops. So they just assumed that there was one. I don't know, and maybe a story cropped up that it actually did, but I
Is there any evidence for this 3 angelic visits between 1834 and 1842?
Yeah, Joseph said it happened.
I've never heard of that number 3 before. That was kind of a surprise in this, but I hadn't read. I mean, there must be different accounts where he's telling that story multiple times, maybe, and they've added it up to 3.
It's isn't it more than 3 times that he said that? I mean, wasn't that kind of his go-to approach in proposal when he'd get rebuffed? Well,
we don't. I mean, so this is back where. Again, they've already set up earlier in this that all of our, like the documentation for all this stuff is thin, right?
Yeah.
And so then to total up the number of times he might have said that or not that we have in the record and say 3, I think that's probably a little bit of a leap.
And I think it is interesting the times that they footnote and the times that they don't. So I haven't looked at this footnote 10. Is that anything that would point to the number of times being 3 or... Is that about the consent or the family?
9 and 10 just deal with Mormon historical studies, Benjamin F. Johnson papers.
Well, so if you're remembering, and then this I don't remember, I was thinking it might be Benjamin F. Johnson was the uncle. So when you said that, I thought maybe that's his recollection and he was her uncle. Because he has all kinds of crazy early recollections of polygamy. He's ends up being a really, popularizer or whatever of polygamy, and so I don't know. Maybe that is where that's coming from, and I just haven't. Because I feel like I read Don Bradley's article, and I don't remember him talking about that. So I would.
But is Fanny Alger really the first evidence of his infidelity? I thought is it Miranda Johnson? Did she precede?
Yeah.
Fanny Alger, because the Mormons will tell you the story that Joseph Smith, for no good reason, was dragged out of his home in Kirtland. And one of his children died from exposure. Yeah. As a result,
the tar feathering.
Not Kirtland, in Hiram, at the Johnson house in Hiram, Ohio.
In Hiram, and this preceded Fanny Alger, and some evidence, and I don't know how strong this evidence is, suggests that the Johnson brothers of Miranda accused Joseph of having sex with their sister, and that's the reason why they drug him out and tarred and feathered him. Is that true?
Well, we have an account of that, right? And so in that account, there's this idea that the doctor had been brought out and the doctor was being called upon to castrate Joseph Smith. And in all of whatever historical traditional society, when you're being called on to do that, like in this nighttime vigilante activity, it's because of an accusation of adultery. So yeah, that's where that all comes from. So we don't know. That's an account.
And that would have been a good thing to cover earlier.
Yeah, we did talk about this a little bit earlier, Randy, and one of the things that John mentioned was the original marriage section in the Doctrine and Covenants, which preceded Fanny Alger, made reference to claims of sexual mischief, I guess, for lack of my mind working earlier.
But so I think in other words, that there's this idea in Kirtland, but that could have been for this Fanny Alger thing too, because that It's around that time. So that
Okay.
that DNC section is 1835. This Fanny Alger incident is hard to date. I guess it's 1835 or possibly 1836. And so it's so that DNC, the original DNC section, says, inasmuch as this Church of Christ has been whatever it is, buffeted with people have been calling us polygamists, we want to assert that we are not, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, why is somebody talking? Why do they feel the need to actually publish that in the DNC in 1835? Well, this is somehow swirling around at the time, whether or not it's just because of Fanny Alger or whether or not it's been on Joseph Smith's brain this whole time. We don't know. So.
But Fanny Alger is not included as a spouse in FamilySearch.org.
Really?
Yeah. It appears that the other women are, but she is.
Well, she is now on LDS.org, so...
right, so the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing on that one.
Yeah. All right, Randy, you got the next section. Change.
Okay, this section is called Plural Marriage and Eternal Marriage, which is always funny because, like, whenever you have DNC in gospel doctrine, you barely get into the section. What do you get, like 10 verses in, and then that's it. That's the whole lesson. Anyway, the same revelation that taught of plural marriage was part of a larger revelation given to Joseph Smith, that marriage could last beyond death, and that eternal marriage was essential to inheriting the fullness that God desires for his children. As early as 1840, Joseph Smith privately taught Apostle Parley P. Pratt that the heavenly order allowed Pratt and his wife to be together for time and all eternity. Joseph also taught that men like Pratt, who had remarried following the death of his first wife, could be married or sealed to their wives for eternity under the proper conditions. It's ironic that they mention Parley P. Pratt, who was murdered for stealing a Southerner's wife while he was a missionary.
Well, except for that's the best one that they have for an earlier.
Who's going to go to?
Who are we going to have the earliest, teaching here?
So we talked about this a little bit earlier, and I asked the question if this idea of eternal marriage existed before 1840. I mean, it sounds like here they're kind of stretching to say as early as 1840 this was being taught.
Right. So they're trying to get a little earlier than
maybe
anybody. In other words, Joseph's teaching here about time and eternity before he's teaching any men about having plural marriage on their own, which is a year or so after that, or a year or 2 years after that.
Yeah.
So,
okay, Matt, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah. The sealing of husband and wife for eternity was made possible by the restoration of priesthood keys and ordinances. On April 3rd, 1836, the Old Testament prophet Elijah appeared to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery in the Kirtland Temple and restored the priesthood keys necessary to perform ordinances for the living and the dead, including sealing families together. Marriages performed by priesthood authority could link loved ones to each other for eternity on condition of righteousness. Marriages performed without this authority would end at death.
Now, this is just like ex post facto. We're going back and we're superimposing what we teach today on what was happening in 1836 with this so-called restoration of Elijah, because they weren't doing any, like,
right.
They didn't do any of these sealed marriages at 1836.
Right. So this isn't this. So that. And even in the footnotes, when you go to the different sections that they're even referencing the visions that were written down at the time, or, the other footnotes that they're referencing here is, from the Gospel of Matthew, which is the big Catholic or papal thing, thou art Peter, on this rock I'll build this church, what you seal in heaven will be sealed in, what you seal on earth will be sealed in heaven, that kind of thing. So anyway, so that's what they're saying here. There's an idea of keys in this vision of 1836, but it is certainly not keys about ordinances for the living and the dead and sealing families together. That's something that emerges later and then is reimposed on the earlier vision.
So what was the intention of that Elijah revelation with the keys then, if it wasn't sealing living and dead and families forever?
I think it's like this idea that Elijah's going to come back. That's already in the Old Testament, and then it's mentioned in the New Testament. So Elijah is going to return, and Elijah is going to give you the keys of turning the hearts of the children to their fathers and that kind of thing. So it's just a general millennial idea and a general millennial expectation. It has nothing to do with this later theological proposition that somehow married couples need to be sealed so they can be in heaven together, which no, this is not actually a theological problem for any Christians outside of Mormonism. No Christians think they're going to be separated from their loved ones in heaven. They didn't imagine that heaven is where you will be with loved ones.
Yeah.
So there's as a theological proposition, this doesn't make any sense at all. And
it seems a little strange to tie these particular keys, if we're going to call them keys, to Elijah. Because like the millennial connection is very clear with Elijah. That makes complete sense. But it would seem like if they're referencing, Peter, and that the things that he seals on earth will be sealed in heaven, that he would be a better person to restore the keys of sealing. Or I don't know. Is there anything special about Elijah in the Old Testament of sealing?
Yeah, well, he gets visited by Elijah and Elias, and they're the same person, just a different translation.
Right, but the reason for saying that is because in 1836 they believe that Jesus is going to come any time now, and that before Jesus comes, it's been prophesied that Elijah or Elias would return and pave the way for him. So that was the reason for saying that Elijah came. And then later it was added that, and he also gave these keys for sealing. That happened at the same time, everybody.
Well, that's why I think, this is one of these things about the power of metaphor. So you already have this idea that Elijah's come back, he gave you keys to the dispensation or something like that. What do the keys open up? Well, keys open up all kinds of things, they lock all kinds of things, and so once you're already
it's a skeleton
going down
key.
that path, in other words, so then you start imposing, you actually are then working from that metaphor, and then from that metaphor you come up with later things. But it's anachronistic to take those later things and say that those were implicit in the thing at the time. They weren't.
Right.
Well, Elijah's important because he appears with Moses at the Transfiguration, so he's got to be important. Nowadays, if he appeared to Jesus in the when he was transfigured, he's got to appear to Joseph, and it did happen on April 3rd, which is Passover. So, boom.
Also, only 3 days from Jesus' actual birth.
Yeah,
April 6th.
But they actually, in coming to Kirtland, he actually fulfilled the Jewish prophecy that Elijah would come back around Passover.
So that transfiguration story, and I'm fuzzy now. That is a biblical story. It's not just a Mormon extrapolation on a few verses in the New Testament.
That's a real biblical story. But then the LDS Church injects their own meaning. This is where they say, or at least I was always taught, this is where Jesus was given the Melchizedek priesthood.
Right.
Which really didn't make a lot of sense. But
so what does it mean in the general world in Christianity, the transfigure? What was the purpose of Moses and Elijah? Why is that significant appearing to James and John?
Moses and Elijah, so there is a idea that so those are the two figures in the Old Testament that where there's this notion that they're taken up by God and therefore never died. And so they're so Mark is the source of this idea of the transfiguration, the evangelist who we call Mark, the gospel attributed to Mark. And so that what Mark is doing in this, Mark is heavily also apocalyptic, and so he is definitely thinking that the whole end of everything is about to happen in his lifetime, and so he is bringing them back again in fulfillment of prophecy that the world is going to end and Jesus is going to come back and that kind of thing. So,
okay, all right, Jake, got it.
All right. Sorry, I was on mute, and then I didn't realize that I was on mute. So, which was the last paragraph? Sorry.
Your marriage performed.
Marriage performed. By priesthood authority meant that the procreation of children and perpetuation of families would continue into the eternities. Joseph Smith's revelation on marriage declared that the continuation of seeds forever and ever helped to fulfill God's purposes for his children. This promise was given to all couples who were married by priesthood authority and were faithful to their covenants.
I think it's really interesting what John said about Christians not having a problem with eternal families and stuff like, because what is heaven unless it's a place where everyone you love is with you. But Mormons try to make it a problem. They try to
create a problem.
They create a problem, and they got the solution. And here are all the passwords
that only they can cure.
Right. Here's all the passwords and the handshakes you have to know. Of course, you can't get those until you're super righteous. But these are all those things you need to get into super VIP heaven. Tit pat to Jake, and it's funny how they try to take hold of something that nobody even considers an issue.
Yeah.
Right. So procreation's really important when it comes to marriage. Got it.
Yeah.
I know, but this part of it is out. This part of it is totally alien to Christian or almost anybody's, I think, conception of afterlife or non-life, which is this idea that there's going to be a kind of a heavenly procreation thing where everybody's just going to make, going to be having spirit babies forever and ever.
Celestial sex, baby.
Yeah.
And so for this part of it, for me, this theological proposition, which is at the core of the entire LDS Mormon plan of salvation, is pretty crazy, which is to say, if there is like a God is a guy who was a guy on a planet, and his wife or many wives or whatever were women on some planet, and so he's come to godhood, and he's where he's at, and he's increasing in glory and forever and ever, and he's having all these spirit children and all these planets and all that kind of thing, and so then he has just billions and trillions and quadrillions or whatever of all of these spirit children, a huge proportion of which are never going to achieve godhood, adulthood, right? So in other words, he's a god. So as a reproductive entity, he's attempting to reproduce and create new gods. That's what the reproductive strategy is. We're elevating reproduction here to celestial level theologically with this idea. So the problem is we know at least a third of the host didn't, a third of the kids aren't making it for sure. And who knows however many else are going to get to the highest degree of glory in the celestial kingdom, which is to say godhood, and become full adults. And so God here is essentially like reproducing like the lowest kind of whatever krill or something, where he's spewing out all of these bazillions of eggs that are all getting eaten up, and only one or two of them is going to make it back to being a full adult, as opposed to the kind of way that we as humans think of reproduction and would prefer to do it, where every single child is invested with such value that you're not going to lose one of them, right?
Yeah, I'm going to say what God, the picture you painted is basically the model of crocodiles. You're like one out of hundreds of crocodile babies make it to adulthood, and that's basically what you're getting with right. God. He's just shooting out as many seed as he can just to get one or two out of thousands to make it right. to adult crocodilehood.
Yeah, it doesn't really fit with like the mammalian life cycle, because in mammals who give birth to live young, there's a very they're much more limited procreatively in terms of like how frequently and how many offspring they can produce, and so you have to have a really low failure rate to be able to make it. So it seems weird that would be flipped on its head. It also seems just kind of a weird like extrapolation of like, well, it's just like everything you like about this life, but better. I don't know. It's just like this kind of weird caricature of life on Earth that continues into the eternities, and that's what you're striving for, Yeah,
except worse, because you're going to be in eternity and all your kids are going to just have this horrible fate. And I hope you're going to be sad about it, right? And so I think theologically, if that was an actual theological proposition, what we could instead say is that God has only ever had in this world one kid, one son, Jesus. And so in other words, the entire world was made for Jesus, so that Jesus could have this incubation period and thing, and Jesus became matured and became God now, right? And so all the rest of us are just props, because otherwise, what it's weird that we do. Anyway, that I just think this is a weird theological proposition. So,
Right.
Yeah, I also don't want to be having kids forever. I'm really happy where I'm at now, and my kids are teenagers. I'd like that period of time.
Well, you can go to the telestial kingdom. That is the celestial vasectomy.
That sounds like that sounds like the better of the two.
It's more than a vasectomy because you're not even allowed to have sterile sex.
You're right.
Like you get fully. You get castrated and your dick gets cut off.
All right.
I want to bang. I just don't want to procreate.
All right, let's move on because we still got a long way to go, and it's late.
Yeah.
Okay, plural marriage in Nauvoo. For much of Western history, family interest, in quotes, economic, political, and social considerations dominated the choice of spouse. Parents had the power to arrange marriages or forestall unions of which they disapproved. By the late 1700s, romance and personal choice began to rival these traditional motives and practices. By Joseph Smith's time, many couples insisted on marrying for love, as he and Emma did when they eloped against her parents' wishes. Okay.
What?
And all of this is
a setup paragraph.
Yeah.
They're setting us up.
Yeah. Let's read the punchline. This sounds like a setup.
it is.
Okay, I'm interested.
Go ahead, John.
Latter-day Saints' motives for plural marriage. Oh, see?
Yep.
We had no idea what that was setting us up for, but now we're going to find out the motives. Motives for plural marriage were often more religious than economic or romantic.
Right.
Besides their desire to be obedient, a strong incentive was the hope of living in God's presence with family members. In the revelation on marriage, the Lord promised participants crowns of eternal lives and exaltation in eternal worlds. Men and women, parents and children, ancestors and progeny were to be sealed to each other, their commitment lasting into the eternities, consistent with Jesus' promise that priesthood ordinances reformed on earth could be bound in heaven.
I just think that, like what they're describing here in practice was such a horrible form of abuse. Where Joseph Smith would be able to tell these women, if you do this, if you join into this with me, then you'll have exaltation in the eternal world. You'll have crowns of eternal lives. But if you don't, you and your family and your whole line are going to be damned forever. I mean, it's just it's.
Well, it's interesting that although it's not romantic and certainly not sexual, he tended to pick the young hot ones.
Well, I don't know. Maybe.
I say tended. I'm not saying every single one of them were.
Maybe so.
That's where they tended.
Yeah.
So
right.
my great grandparents gave their 14-year-old daughter to Joseph Smith to be one of his wives. And so what was their motivation for doing that?
What are you talking about, Kimball?
No, Nancy Mariah Winchester.
Okay. Wow.
So.
Yeah. Well, who cares about her desires and fulfillment? This is gonna create a eternal dynasty.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in other words, that's probably the case. We don't know. We don't have a lot of sources, or about what went on in the family and everything like that. So, but it's the idea probably that they wanted to be sealed as a family in some kind of celestial clan that was bound to Joseph Smith. They knew Joseph Smith was heading for exaltation.
Yeah.
They're going to be hooked. They're going to chain their star to his, right? And that'll pull them through. And so, why wouldn't they want to be tied into that?
And these are the motives behind these unions. The motive is what they're calling religious, but it's just obedience to God.
Obedience.
All right, yeah. It's the desire to be obedient, a strong incentive,
Yep.
But it was their obedience to Joseph Smith who was representing God to them, and it just I don't know.
Yep.
But isn't that also within your family interest? Like with a lot of these women that were asked that were told that their family would receive salvation if they did this, like, isn't that also self-interest?
Totally.
Like how is that much different than the king of whatever marry? The prince of X marries the queen of the princess of Y or whatever.
And why put interest in quotes like it's a weird that yeah. economic, political, and social considerations. But not
how is being told that, you know, the prophet of your religion is going to be struck down if you don't marry him? How is that not a social consideration?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I agree.
Well, there are other social considerations too. So you have this kind of connection, and then you know, as opposed to somebody who gets put on the out, suddenly you're in the in group in Nauvoo, which is a theocracy. So you end up getting elevated. You might get special business considerations. So there were social and economic aspects to the whole thing.
Yep.
Right.
All right, Randy.
Is it the only thing I can think of, or I'm reminded of, is the Vacation, the scene where Chevy Chase goes out and swims with Christy Brinkley, and then afterwards his wife says, "Do you think she's pretty?" He's like, "What? Or do you like her?" "What? She's ugly." That's what this paragraph sums up for me. It had nothing to do with romance or sexual attraction. It was religious. Anyway,
It's all pure. Yeah. All right. So the first plural marriage, is that my paragraph?
Yep.
Okay. The first plural marriage in Nauvoo took place when Louisa Beeman and Joseph Smith were sealed in April 1841. Joseph married many additional wives and authorized other Latter-day Saints to practice plural marriage. They love that euphemism, don't they? The practice spread slowly at first. By June 1844, when Joseph died, approximately 29 men and 50 women had entered into plural marriage, in addition to Joseph and his wives. When the Saints entered the Salt Lake Valley in 1847, at least 196 men and 521 women had entered into plural marriages. Participants in these early plural marriages pledged to keep their involvement confidential, though they anticipated a time when the practice would be publicly acknowledged.
Anything?
Well, I guess since we got John on, what is it? I don't know the name of that elderly couple that I think Rock Waterman loves.
Oh, the Prices.
The Prices.
Yeah. This is where they say is, you know, hey, this was a Brigham Young thing. Joseph Smith had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And I guess I probably biting off a chunk that's too big to chew.
No, well, they're totally wrong. Rock is wrong. We get along. I like him. He's a nice guy. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, he's a thoughtful person and everything else. I mean, so
you guys had a great picture together at Sunstone, by the way.
That was awesome.
Yeah, and we get along great. And he's a gentleman, and we to debate with, which I am called upon to a fair amount because I'm one of the few people who's read the Price's book. So in terms of the Mormon Bloggernacle, obviously a lot of people in RLDS fundamentalists have read that. But yeah, their book is old, professional history RLDS apologetics just brought over. So essentially, what it's based on is if you take Joseph Smith's public statements, which we'll get down to in a later section of this, Joseph Smith was publicly denouncing polygamy left and right. He was lying about it. It'll be called in this statement carefully worded, phrases or whatever, but they're carefully worded in order to deceive people. So he was deceiving people, and people who've taken him at his published word, including people in the RLDS Church, believed that was the case. But the evidence is overwhelming. So,
all right.
So, what's the point of highlighting this, Louisa Beeman, when they've already above said, yeah, Fanny Alger too? So how are we supposed to reconcile
this is the first one in Nauvoo.
So this is the first one really authorized. And again, they earlier talked about how it has to be authorized, or it has to be under the correct authority. And so this is the first one. So
but they're trying
well,
to
what
they're
about
trying to
Far
draw
West?
Yeah, because there was Harris or Harrison or something like that.
Lucinda Pendleton Harris.
Okay, yeah, Lucinda, right. Because they're trying to draw a straight line from Fanny Alger to Louisa Beeman and skip Lucinda, right?
Yeah, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I don't know. I don't know why that's happening. So.
Okay.
There's a lot of omissions in this essay that don't make that much. There's a lot of like splitting hairs that seem really arbitrary and totally unnecessary. But some of those are coming later.
I mean, I'll mention the Lucinda Harris part.
Yeah.
So I'll just mention it because I've got like a famous essay on by common consent about the milk and stripping story.
Okay.
And so that's one of like the two things that I've ever written for whatever reason that people have really read. Yeah. So anyway, one of the things that possibly behind the milk and stripping story, this is a idea that Don Bradley has, is that that it's possible that because that Lucinda Harris here is a neighbor of Thomas Marsh's wife, that the scandal that Thomas Marsh's wife is actually upset about in Far West is the fact that in Far West Joseph Smith is like conducting an affair or a plural marriage with Lucinda Harris. And so if that's the case, then that's the milk and strippings part of the story, although I still stand by the other part, which is that Thomas Marsh's leaving of the church is about the Danites and the treason. In other words, which is what he wrote in his affidavit. But there may well be a background to the wife conflict thing, and it's made into this thing. The moral of the story, as it's told, is it's over this inconsequential thing. Well, if it's over, Joseph Smith sleeping with Lucinda Harris, that's not inconsequential.
Right.
It's a far cry from milk strippings.
Yeah.
Sure.
So they pledged to keep their involvement confidential, though anticipated a time when the practice would be publicly acknowledged. Nevertheless, rumors spread.
Yeah.
A few men unscrupulously used these rumors to seduce women to join them in an unauthorized practice, sometimes referred to as spiritual wifery.
This is a specific reference to John C. Bennett,
right,
by the way.
Yep. When this was discovered, the men were cut off from the church. The rumors prompted members and leaders to issue carefully worded denials that denounced spiritual wifery and polygamy, but were silent about what Joseph Smith and others saw as a divinely mandated celestial plural marriage. The statements emphasized that the church practiced no marital law other than monogamy, while implicitly leaving open the possibility that individuals, under direction of God's living prophet, might do so. So I can throw out my lesson on honesty and omission versus commission that I was taught all my life.
Where do they get the chutzpah to say it implicitly leaves open the possibility? How's that implicit in that section of D&C where it says one man should be married to one wife, period?
Well, that's not the statement that they're talking about. So what they'll say about that section is, the church passed that while Joseph Smith was out of town.
Really? I didn't know that was their defense.
Yeah, that's the defense of that one. No, what they're talking about here is a bunch of statements that Joseph Smith made where he just bald-facedly denounces polygamy. And this is the things that Rock Waterman that we were just talking about, like in other words, he finds maybe compelling, or the Prices find compelling. And so here's a quote of one of these. So Joseph Smith is saying out loud in public, "I had not been married scarcely 5 minutes and made one proclamation of the gospel before it was reported that I had 7 wives. This spiritual wifism, why a man does not speak or wink for fear of being accused of this. What a thing it is for a man to be accused of committing adultery and having 7 wives when I can find one. I am the same man, and I am as innocent as I was 14 years ago, and I can prove them all perjurers."
Sweet Jesus.
And so it's calling it spiritual wifery instead of celestial marriage or whatever other thing he's calling it. That's how he's able to justify this. Well,
I mean, this is like a whole like what we call in contemporary times, this Clintonian way of speaking. I did not have sex with that woman, Monica Lewinsky, because oral sex isn't sex. So in this case, it's like I had not been married scarcely 5 minutes and made a proclamation of the gospel. It was reported that I had 7 wives. Well, he obviously didn't have 7 wives then, right? And so, like you said, spiritual wifism, like you say, that's like a false or perversion, of the true and everlasting covenant of celestial marriage. A man doesn't speak or wink. I mean, he's like probably winking there. I feel like that's the what's his name, Hinckley, when he comes back and explains that everybody does believe in progression.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
eternal progression, right? Even though he told the media that he has never heard of that. But anyway, one doesn't wink about that for being accused of it. It's one thing for a man to be accused of committing adultery. Well, obviously, this is not adultery. He's thinking in his own thing that I have 7 wives. I can only find one. He looks around in the audience. All he sees is one. I'm the same man. I'm as innocent as I was 14 years ago. How innocent was that? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
So as a result of that, they're all perjurers. So there you go.
I love that where he says, "What is that noise?"
The devil.
I love that he says, "I can only find one," and quickly scans the audience because he can't see any of his other spiritual.
Right.
I can only find one. There's no lie in that.
I can only find
one. And wasn't this one of his arguments against Oliver Cowdery's claims? In 1838, Oliver Cowdery was excommunicated, and there were all these reasons listed, and one of them was that Cowdery had accused Joseph Smith of adultery. And that's referring to the Fanny Alger thing, and Joseph's like, that wasn't adultery because they were married.
And so we don't know that. We don't have that explicitly, but what we have in the minutes of the High Council of the Far West Record is that that President Smith gave a very appropriate explanation of the whole girl affair. And so we don't know what that means, or necessarily you just are left to decide for yourself what that was,
or even which girl they're referring to.
Right. Well, they mean Fanny Alger.
Okay, so that's clear.
Yeah, because in other words, because Cowdery is being accused of disloyalty in accusing Smith of adultery when it's obviously not adultery. Yeah. Because of his explanation about the girl affair.
Yeah.
Now, John C. Bennett, that was adultery.
No, that's
spiritual wifery. Yeah. Right.
No, but that means the same thing as adultery.
Right. Yeah. Okay, I think, Jake, it's on you.
Do the next 2 together.
Yeah.
Got it. During the era in which plural marriage was practiced, Latter-day Saints distinguished between sealings for time and eternity and sealings for eternity only. Sealings for time and eternity included commitments and relationships during this life, generally including the possibility of sexual relations. Eternity-only sealings indicated relationships in the next life alone. Evidence indicates that Joseph Smith practiced in both types of sealings. The exact number of women to whom he was sealed in his lifetime is unknown because the evidence is fragmentary. Some of the women who were sealed to Joseph Smith later testified that their marriages were for time and eternity, while others indicated that their relationships were for eternity alone.
What a freaking red herring. Why even comment on this if he participated in both? That'd be fine if they said he only participated in the eternity-only sealings. There's nothing to see here. But the fact that he participated in both, it becomes such a red herring.
But isn't it so that they can say, like with the really young girls, that he probably respected their youth and didn't have sex with them?
Right. Sure, except they talk about speaking with a forked tongue, and they're getting ready to do it here. But sure, it's so they can take whatever position they want in the moment.
Yeah, well, because look at what the very next paragraph, the very next sentence, and I'll just go. Most of those sealed to Joseph Smith were between 20 and 40 years of age at the time of their sealing to him. The oldest, Fanny Young, was 56 years old. The youngest was Helen Mar Kimball, daughter of Joseph's close friend Heber C. and Violet Murray Kimball, who was sealed to Joseph Smith several months before her 15th birthday, which is a nicer way than saying 14. Yeah.
They can't just say 14. Yeah.
I wish there was some way to know how old somebody was before they were 15.
It was also several months after.
Fanny Young, who was several months from turning 57.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Why not call several months before 18? Several months before 19.
Several months after 13.
Exactly. Or just 36 months before she was 18.
So marriage at such an age, inappropriate by today's standards, was legal in that area. And
if it's legal, it's cool.
Yeah. So was slavery. And some women married in their mid-teens. Helen Mar Kimball spoke of her sealing to Joseph as being for eternity only, in quotes, which means no sex.
eternity alone.
Oh, alone. Okay.
If you actually read that
right.
poem, it doesn't seem to be what she's implying.
Okay, I don't know what poem you're talking about, but hang on. Let me finish the paragraph.
We'll do it.
For eternity alone, suggesting that the relationship did not involve sexual relations.
I love the conclusions. It's fragmentary, except when we can draw conclusions that are positive, we're going to do that. That suggests that.
After Joseph's death, Helen remarried and became an articulate defender of him and plural marriage. Have at it.
Okay, here's I have a couple questions for John. So one of them is this very distinct differentiation that they're making between eternity only sealings and what is the other one? Time and eternity sealings. Is what is the evidence for that? Like how is this like a recent kind of apologetic theory?
Yeah.
I've never heard of it before.
Well, I mean, I think it's a very recent formulation of an apologetic theory. The idea that there's a difference between an eternity-only sealing and a time and eternity sealing, that may well go all the way back. But I think that, again, this is when we are doing this thing where we're imposing later very clear ideas maybe, and then we're trying to put it onto this very messy practice.
Yeah.
And it's just I don't think that it totally doesn't convince me, but there are people who in modern Mormonism who want to argue this for the very reason that we've talked about, which is that Mormonism has undergone this incredible transformation where Mormons are now very uncomfortable with sex. And so the idea that sex was going on is very uncomfortable, and so they would rather have that as their premise, that sex wasn't going on, and they'll do anything to read it that way. But anyway, it's not convincing to me, and I think that actually the thing about it between these two things is, yes, maybe becomes a theological idea that evolves, but it's extremely, all of these things are extremely messy. This idea in 1831, we're coming from concubinage, we're eventually getting to these ideas about eternal families, and then how it's going to work out as actual marriages. When it actually becomes real marriages, that's not until you get to Utah, because at this point, all of this stuff. I mean, there's all of it. We're calling it marriage all the way through here, but Joseph Smith isn't. He's not supporting everybody. They're not all moving into houses. They're not doing these things like it occurs in Utah. And so a lot of this that happens is there's these later Utah values that are reimposed on this very messy Nauvoo stuff.
And Jake, I remember when I first started looking into this, and I mentioned earlier in our discussion the Institute manual that I saw on LDS.org. It had this idea very clearly in here in connection to D&C 132. So it divided section 132 into sections that talked about celestial marriage, which was marriage for eternity and the kind of marriage that we have now, and plural marriage, which was just temporary that they had then. So it was another way of trying to go in and recreate that original message to fit today's paradigm. And it was so infuriating to me because I had just read 132 through for the first time, maybe ever, and then went into this Institute manual that was telling me how I should interpret what I had just read that is so not what they said that it was. It just, so I would say it's a very recent way of respinning that story.
Yeah.
In an LDS context, doesn't eternity include time? When we talk about eternity, aren't we talking about the beginning, the pre-existence through eternity? So isn't this kind of using some more sophistication by saying that eternity somehow only means after you die and going forward, when it really it is one eternal round, isn't it?
Should be.
I don't know.
The LDS context, time here doesn't mean time; it means mortal frame.
Yeah.
So here's my follow-up question. My second question to John is a lot of the footnotes in these last two paragraphs. I think there are 5 or 6 footnotes, but anyway, the majority of them are for Brian Hales.
Yeah,
and I don't want to start any, I don't want to start any shit here. Yeah. But I'm just curious about your perspective on his research, because he's actually cited 8 times. He's the number one single citation source for this essay.
Yeah. and who knows? Maybe he's one of the co-authors of the essay. We don't know who wrote the essay, right?
Right.
So, Brian. I know Brian very well. He's a great guy. I mean, and he's actually the incoming president-elect of the John Whitmer Historical Association. Which is the Community of Christ version of MHA, and we've had a lot of good connections with him. In terms of his work on this topic, my feeling about it is that he had an idea going in, which is that he didn't want to believe that Joseph Smith is having sex with underage wives or with already married wives, and he wrote a big long series of books to try to argue that. So,
right.
But I think that it's really. I think he has said that before that was his premise going in.
Right.
And I think that is clear.
Okay. All right.
Well, it's significant that they choose to try to get Helen Mar Kimball to 15, and I think that's not obviously it's not done, or it's done intentionally, almost universally throughout the country. 14 years, 11 months, and 30 days, a child cannot give consent. So if a child if somebody has sex with a child before their 15th birthday, consent is not an issue. So
meaning it's not possible to claim consent if the victim was under 15.
Correct. That 15th birthday, the 15th birthday is very, very critical in a legal and particularly in a criminal
You mean
context.
now?
Now.
Yeah,
because modern day.
And by the way, because he had consent of her parents.
Right, but that's not an issue. But you can't. You're right. Good point.
Right, but again, when you're framing that story for today's audience,
right, it's the audience that they're considering.
That could be one explanation why they're stating her age based on the age 15 instead of just saying she was 14 years old.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So okay, well, where are we?
But on that one, I do feel kind of compelled though to there's this entire thing of calling Joseph Smith a pedophile over this.
Yeah.
And I actually think that that's not appropriate use of the word pedophile. I think that there's something else that pedophiles are doing.
It's not. Pedophilia is a very distinct in a particular philia. Very, very rare. That's a very rare paraphilia.
Exactly.
Almost nobody has pedophilia. Pedophilia means you are only sexually interested in children, and most people who commit child abuse are also sexually interested in adults. So more accurately, and I say this all the time, it is wrong to call him a pedophile. He's not a pedophile. What I believe he is sexually interested in children, and in some cases, either pubescent or prepubescent children. And that in and of itself is a form of is another paraphilia. And it's a paraphilia I suggest people on this call do not have. Now, when you're talking only about post-pubescent, that's a different conversation altogether. But when you're in that 14-year-old range, you are talking about somebody who is who at least it causes concern or raises questions given his age at the time about having a sexual interest in children.
Yeah. How old was he when he married Helen Mar Kimball? Was he 32, 33?
I think he was more like 35, wasn't he?
He was born in 1805. I don't know why I know that.
Maybe he was a few months away from 35. Let's just say that.
He was 12 months away from 35.
Yeah.
I like the football rule. If you can't play football against the person of that age, you can't have sex with them. Okay. Think through that one. Bob will love that. That's for you, Bob.
Okay. All right. So, John, I think you're the next paragraph following his marriage.
All right. Following his marriage to Louisa Beeman, and before he married other single women, Joseph Smith was sealed to a number of women who were already married.
Boom.
Neither these women nor Joseph explained much about these sealings, though several women said they were for eternity alone. One of those, Yeah, they must have been eternity alone because they're not confused. Otherwise, what do these mean? Okay, other women left no records, making it unknown whether the sealings were for time and eternity or for were eternity alone. So now, in this case, what we've already done now is established that time and eternity means he gets to have sex with him, and eternity alone means he doesn't, which is preposterous, you know. So anyway, I mean, in other words, so like this whole thing was like really clean, and it was always, you know. So anyway.
But here again, they've already said earlier in the essay that we really don't understand a lot about it, and it was fuzzy, and God didn't really provide directions. But now they're declaring this bright line rule: if it was time and eternity, that's sex. If it was eternity, it wasn't sex. But they've just said we don't really get it, except when we want to read it in a way that's most favorable to Joseph Smith,
and for some reason,
for our narrative rather,
for some reason, saying that some of these he didn't have sex with is a good thing,
right?
Right.
Even if he has sex with just one other person besides his wife is problematic,
right?
But we're talking about many here, even if some he didn't.
I know, but I mean, ultimately, we're also going to get into. Now, this kind of paragraph is ultimately now going to get into trouble when we're going to get to the conclusion of this whole thing, which is we're raising up a righteous seed.
Yeah,
right. I mean, that's our justification here. Or
and go back to Jacob.
Or by the way, if Joseph Smith, and this is like what I kind of was always arguing with, I don't know, like Rock and all these other people. If Joseph Smith is having this intensely, you know, like spiritual wifery, which is not physical wifery, then what kind of apostate is Brigham Young, who is definitely sleeping with his wives, right?
Yeah,
right. That's the thing about this. It's so baffling is that there's been so much obfuscation of the fact that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy, but we have no problem whatsoever admitting that Brigham Young and John Taylor, all these other guys practiced polygamy, had tons of kids. That, you know, we parade people around the Lion House and stuff in Salt Lake, be like, well, this is where wife number 2 slept, and 3, and he had 56 kids. Like, we don't give a shit. But for some reason, Joseph Smith, it's like this. Completely, it's untouchable in a way.
Different standard too. I mean, it's absolutely a different standard, as if Brigham Young doesn't exist.
Well, the problem they're dealing with is that you can't deny Brigham Young was having sex with his wives,
right?
Because he had over 100 kids. Actually, Jack, he had over 50 wives and over 100 kids with those wives. So they just kind of, just like what they do with Brigham Young with the racism and everything. They just kind of, you know, I don't know if you guys listen to the podcast with Mike the Christian. When he worked in CES, they basically were forced to come to the notion that Brigham Young was a necessary evil. Joseph Smith is great, but Brigham Young is necessary. So they just you know what? There's nothing we can do about Brigham Young, but we can clean this Joseph Smith story up because there's enough fuzziness in this area.
You know, if only someone could organize some kind of a DNA search for possible progeny of Joseph Smith.
That's a fantastic idea.
I wonder if we'll hear anything more about that in the future sometime.
As far as I know, they haven't found anything. Is that right, John?
They've been studying it for a while and they haven't found any. So
yeah. Okay. I'm just going to leave that out there for a little while. Okay.
Right. So one thing I want to point out that they do cite Todd Compton's In Sacred Loneliness right here in this paragraph, which I think is fascinating that they include that as I mean, that gives it credibility.
Yep.
A little bit.
well, if they're going to cite it, all
right. But this is a really fun section here because we start to speculate about Joseph Smith's possible motivations for having sex or not having sex or marrying, you know, polyandry or not polyandry. So where are we? Are we at Randy?
Yes.
Can we take like a 3-minute break?
Can we take a potty break? Yeah.
Yeah.
One
okay.
sec.
Let's take a break. All right. Who's got the next paragraph? Oh, Matt does.
I thought I did.
Oh, no, you're right. Randy does.
You know, Randy did. There are several possible explanations, that one.
There you go.
Yeah, I got it. And scene. There are several possible explanations for this practice, of course. None of them any good. These sealings may have provided a way to create an eternal bond or link between Joseph's family and other families within the church. These ties extended both vertically from parent to child and horizontally. It's like multidimensional. From one family to another. Today, such eternal bonds are achieved through the temple marriages of individuals who are also sealed to their own birth families, which is only vertical. In this way, linking families together. Well, I mean, kind of.
No, you're not right. It's there. Go ahead.
I'm not right. There's no inter-family. It's all intra-family.
Yeah, but you're all sealed to the father, so at some point your father to your wife to her father.
But then he's sealed to his father, both grandfathers, and then it's.
But it goes sideways. At some point, if your wife's sealed to another family, that starts shooting off horizontally.
Hey, Matt, we still got a long way to go, man.
All right, sorry.
Yeah, man. Please.
Where did I leave off?
Joseph Smith feelings? I don't know.
Oh yeah, okay. That's I'll go there. Joseph. Now, when you were gone, never mind. I'm going to go on. Joseph Smith's sealings to women already married may have been an early version of linking one family to another.
Maybe.
In Nauvoo, most, if not all, of the first husbands seem to have continued living in the same household with their wives during Joseph's lifetime. And complaints about these sealings with Joseph Smith are virtually absent from the documentary record. Therefore, nobody complained at the time.
Why would you complain?
Yeah. They may not even known.
Right.
And they want to make it all about, like, okay, he didn't fuck these guys' wives. Fine. I'll grant you that premise.
No.
But you're taking no. Let me finish.
Okay.
But you're taking that guy's wife for eternity. If you believe in the theology, isn't that like several orders of magnitude worse?
No, because he's going to the celestial kingdom anyway.
Because Joseph took his wife.
Well, actually, I mean, aren't there things where Hiram is saying, like somebody makes that exact complaint and Hiram explains it to somebody, well, there's going to be effectively drones in the celestial kingdom.
Oh, the servants?
Yeah.
Okay, so
sexless servants.
Okay. One question I have is that the idea of the polyandry, that's always a shelf breaker. Like, people find out about the polygamy and they're like, Joseph Smith practicing polygamy, and they're like, shit, but you know what? All right, I can get around this. Brigham Young did it. Other people did it. It's okay. And then they found out the polyandry and they're like, what the hell is going on? Like, I don't understand why this is so much – is such a catalyst for people leaving the church, whereas the polygamy isn't as much. Why is that?
Because we're all sexist. Those of us that get bothered by it, the thought of some guy taking my wife, fuck you. That's my property.
But but it's not just for men. It's for women as well.
And I don't see it quite that way. It more of he's violating this so-called sacred covenant of marriage between two other people. He's entering into that. I don't know. It seems like it's different.
There's a question here about whether these things that Joseph Smith is doing in Nauvoo is actually marriage.
Yeah.
And again, like I say, it has none of the things that, other than a ceremony and maybe sex or maybe not sex, according to this essay, there's none of the hallmarks of anything else that makes it marriage, right? They're not all living together in a house. He's not providing for anybody or anything like that. And so, is it marriage or is it not marriage? If the person is already married and then this thing happens, what is this thing? Yeah. So I think it undermines the apologetic that this thing is actually marriage in some way.
Well, it's not only that.
It undermines the theology and the doctrine of, if this woman has a husband, especially if he's a member of the church, then there's no need to have another guy. And I know that's the other thing I've heard as well. Joseph Smith was marrying other men's wives who were not either righteous or were not members, but there's no basis in that.
Well, there's quotes from Brigham Young that said, if you are a woman and you're married to someone who's substandard, then and you can find someone who will take you, who is higher in the spiritual priesthood hierarchy, then you can actually get married to that higher priesthood guy without a writ of divorce. It's in Todd Compton's introduction. John, do you know what I'm talking about?
That they could trade up.
Yeah, there's a non-punitive trade up clause.
Yeah, and so this is an example that's not, again, one of these things that's not mentioned in this essay, that Utah Territory or whatever has a higher rate of divorce than is average for the United States at the time, because people are doing, because they've unraveled what marriage is, right. And so it's not. Anyway, so it's not clear what marriage is.
Well, and there's one other aspect, Jake, that you're speaking to your bafflement of why people find this more offensive than polygamy. It's because it was never taught to them. So they find something out that they had never heard of before, and then they feel betrayed, that they've been lied to. So there's another level of impact of finding out about something like polyandry, and it's no small thing.
What is the law of adoption? Doesn't that apply here, where men were being adopted into Joseph's family, and that was supposed to also provide this horizontal connection to Joseph Smith? Am I misinterpreting what the law of adoption was?
Yeah, well, you had men being sealed to men, right?
Yep.
And that doesn't happen anymore. They've abandoned that completely. So I guess
if that was going on,
yeah.
Well, sorry.
It was. So no, I mean, you're exactly right. In other words, they're worried about, or this is where this argument is coming in. That is, there's this dynastic sealing that's happening where they're starting to decide that heaven is going to be this place where there are these clans, or this balkanization where the most glorious clan has the most people attached to the greatest leaders or something like that, and so you want to be sealed to that, and so that's one of the selling points that you're telling these parents of the daughters here,
Okay.
Yeah. And there's no explanation of why that was abandoned in this article, right?
I don't think it mentions the law. Does it mention the law of adoption?
No, it doesn't. But if that exists, then wouldn't that make this him sealing to other wives? Other men's wives unnecessary? He could just seal to the guys instead.
Well, I'll tell you, if I was an apologist, I would use the law of adoption to argue for the non-sexual nature of some of these sealings. To say that look here, sealing wasn't necessarily about sex; it was about something that was going on in the eternities, as in the case of the law of adoption. So, but
I know, but the problem is that it's all premised on this background of sexism.
Yeah.
So in other words, women aren't people. Of course the law of when you're sealing to another man, of course it's not sexual, because you're not going to be sexual with another man. That's a person. So that's what sealing is. So
they consent.
You know what I love? I love that we have John Hamer, who's like the anti-serum to the TBM whisperer of Glenn.
Really? Okay.
That's how I see it.
Okay. All right. Who's got the next paragraph?
These sealings may also be explained by Joseph's reluctance to enter plural marriage because of the sorrow it would bring to his wife Emma. He may have believed that sealings to married women would comply with the Lord's command without requiring him to have normal marriage relationships. This could explain why, according to Lorenzo Snow, the angel reprimanded Joseph for having demurred on plural marriage even after he had entered into the practice. After this rebuke, according to this interpretation, Joseph returned primarily to sealings with single women.
Primarily. I like that even in the essay here, where it's mostly working out that way now. Right. It's mostly for time only, or eternity only, or whatever. I only occasionally have sex with the eternity only women.
Right.
I love the qualifiers. I mean, I just think of some of the BS arguments that are made in court. This could explain why, or you're completely full of shit. It's one of the two, but it could. I'm not saying it's not. Is it possible?
This is 4 paragraphs of spaghetti against the wall, though.
Right.
I mean, we've already, this may be this, or it could be. Another possibility is going to be the next paragraph.
So, John, are there any clues or indications in the historical record that Joseph really cared about bringing sorrow to Emma, and he didn't want to do it. He wanted to protect her? Because I think of like the Partridge sisters that he married without her knowing, or really against her will while she was gone. And then when she came back and said, all right, you can marry them. And he went, okay, let's have a ceremony and let's do it. You know,
yeah, he's already been having sex, and then Bushman describes this scene. The scene in Rough Stone Rolling is seared in my brain,
right?
Where Joseph is holding the door as Emma's trying to bust through and beat the shit out of these teenage girls that have been fucking his wife or her. Been fucking.
Right, after she changes her mind again. But
right.
So, like, to make this argument that maybe Joseph was just he didn't want to hurt Emma's feelings. Like, what indication do we have that he might have been doing that?
Well, I think that an indication, I think, is that, I think that they were good partners who were in love with each other and who were connected with each other. So I don't think that he doesn't have a situation of a marriage where, you know, he just continuously resented his wife. I mean, this essay actually pointed out that they eloped together out of love. I think, for example, like in a negative evidence, William Law, who had his wife propositioned by Joseph Smith, he at a time when Emma was was deciding that she was going to collaborate with Joseph on this and accommodate it somehow. He thinks of her as being the most duplicitous, awful woman ever, and just exactly cut from the same cloth as Joseph Smith. So, I mean, that's his impression. I think is totally uncharitable to her. I think that she was going through. I mean, she was in a really impossible situation. But I think that there's all kinds of indications that they do care for each other. So I don't know that I would phrase. I wouldn't phrase it this way.
Now, right.
But his reluctance is the whole reason, or whatever. But I mean, he's thinking about her. He's thinking about her thoughts. I think there's like a letter too, where it's like he's like writing to somebody or other, one of these wives. Come and visit me, but don't come when Emma's coming. That kind of thing. But he doesn't want to.
Oh, well,
he doesn't want to get caught. But on the other hand, he doesn't want to. Anyway, he doesn't want to have trouble. But he's
trying to spare her feelings. That's why he hid it from her, like all good men do that are cheating.
Yeah.
Well,
if you have an affair, don't tell your wife unless you get caught.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's not a good example.
You heard it. You heard it here first, folks. So, but no, I remember hearing at some point, John, and I don't know if you could corroborate this or not, but during this time when Joseph married the Beeman sisters, the reason that Emma wasn't there was because Partridge. I'm sorry, yeah, the Partridge sisters. That Emma had gone to St. Louis and she was planning on divorcing Joseph. She had left.
She was in St. Louis buying furniture.
But that was the story that she told people on her return. But the real reason, and I think this was something that came from like William Clayton's journal. I remember talking with someone who was a historian. I don't know if you know Martha Taysom. She mentioned that a few years ago. Is that anything that you had heard?
I haven't heard that.
Okay.
And so I don't know. I haven't heard that she was intending to do that. Maybe that's the case. I have to say I haven't read that.
Okay.
So.
All right. So it's a non-point. What's the next paragraph?
Another possibility.
Is this Jake?
Is that?
Yeah, I think this is me. Another possibility is that in an era when lifespans were shorter than they are today, faithful women felt an urgency to be sealed by priesthood authority. Several of these women were married to either non-Mormons or former Mormons, and more than one of these women later expressed unhappiness in their present marriages. Living in time when divorce was difficult to obtain, these women may have believed a sealing to Joseph would give them blessings they may not have otherwise received in the next life.
Oh, my God.
Is there any evidence that divorce was difficult to obtain?
Yeah.
Well, for women, it was impossible to obtain.
Well, wasn't this in Nauvoo? Aren't we talking about Nauvoo?
Yeah.
No, yeah, but they're still in the cultural milieu of 19th century America. Women had no rights to claim divorce for any reason.
It was hard for anybody to get divorced. That part's true.
All right, then I'll
embrace that. Obtain.
Sure.
I mean, they later get. That's one of the things that they excommunicate Bennett over, that he didn't get a divorce. It was hard to get a divorce. People would leave.
Yeah, but the message of this paragraph is that it goes back to the marrying up. Like these, let's excuse these women.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them didn't want to get divorced. I mean, they were still continuing to live with their husbands afterwards, right?
Well, and that's the point. It's not like they had left their husbands. Like, I've heard about this in America, that people would leave, move states, and not get divorces, and then marry some other guy. But they're effectively monogamous because they're living as man and wife with that one guy. Meanwhile, They are married to other people or other women, whatever it is. But that's not what you're having here. It's not like these women are leaving their husbands, effectively divorcing them or separating, and then marrying Joseph. They're staying in that relationship and married to that guy.
But isn't that nice of Joseph to be able to provide that release and that escape for them in their unhappy marriage? You know?
Indeed.
Right.
Okay, next paragraph. The women who united with Joseph Smith in plural marriage risked reputation and self-respect in being associated with a principle so foreign to their culture and so easily misunderstood by others. I made a greater sacrifice than to give my life, said Zina Huntington Jacobs, for I never anticipated again to be looked upon as an honorable woman. And she was one whose husband was totally complicit with the whole thing when she was married to Joseph and then later to Brigham Young. I don't get that at all. Anyway, nevertheless, she wrote, I searched the scripture, and by humble prayer to my heavenly Father, I obtained a testimony for myself. After Joseph's death, most of the women sealed to him moved to Utah with the saints, remained faithful church members, and defended both plural marriage and Joseph. All right. Okay. Anything there?
No, I can't imagine this is written to anyone but members. My God.
Yeah.
This doesn't make any sense to somebody from a secular point of view.
Yep.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Well, I guess out of that, I mean, it's interesting that they keep using the word a principle so foreign, because again, I would think that they might have wanted to get away from the word the principle, just so as to avoid any connection to fundamentalist Mormons
or to Big Love. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I mean, all fundamentalist Mormons, will say the principle.
Yeah.
Like that. So.
All right, John, you got the next one.
Joseph and Emma. Getting back to poor Emma. Yeah. So plural marriage was difficult for all involved. For Joseph Smith's wife, Emma, it was an excruciating ordeal.
His wife.
I heard what you did there.
His only wife.
I heard what you did there.
You like the one wife, right? Because that's what they do, right? So it's a real wife.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay.
It's the only one they can see.
Yeah. It's the only one I can see. When I look around and I have been accused of 7. All right. Records of Emma's reactions to plural marriage are sparse. She left no first-hand accounts, making it impossible to reconstruct her thoughts. Joseph and Emma loved and respected each other deeply. After he had entered into plural marriage, he poured out his feelings in his journal for his, quote, beloved Emma, whom he described as, quote, undaunted, firm, and unwavering, unchangeable, affectionate Emma. After Joseph's death, Emma kept a lock of his hair in a locket that she wore around her neck.
Well, those adjectives sound like wishful thinking. Undaunted, firm, and unwavering, unchangeable. She changed her mind on polygamy a lot.
Does anyone have the quote of Brigham describing Emma? Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Well, it's just awful, but I don't know what it is.
It's something. I've never met a more damnable liar than Emma. Some to that effect.
Yeah.
And was that because she was denying that Joseph had practiced polygamy, taught polygamy?
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, it's because they obviously were arguing over the Joseph Smith legacy. So, I don't agree with this though. This, and I think it's here we're about to maybe get back and forth. This vacillating Emma. I think that what we have for Emma is she opposes polygamy. She has a period of time when she's willing to. It's getting to the point where she's seeing it as inevitable, and she's entertains the idea of collaborating and accepting it in some kind of way. And then she realizes it's just a mess, and she's not going to do it. And so I don't think that is just this completely wavering, waxing and waning like the moon, like she's this vacillating woman kind of thing.
So she doesn't frequently go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It's just she changes her mind once, then she changes it back again.
That's the way I read it.
Okay, so but that's still not undaunted, firm, and unwavering and unchangeable.
Unwavering, unchangeable.
Well, it's not unchangeable.
And certainly
not unchangeable in favor of
exactly,
it.
yeah. In her predominant,
since I would presume that he would want her to be unchangeable in
right,
in support of,
right? Yeah, predominantly she was not supportive of right. Okay.
Well, did you guys bring this up earlier? DNC 132, the story behind that.
Yeah.
Okay,
well, that's coming up.
Yeah.
Well,
No, we're going to hit it. We're going to hit it again here. Yeah.
All right, I'll shut up then.
All right, Matt.
Emma approved. Is that where we're at?
Yep.
Emma approved, at least for a time, of 4 of Joseph Smith's plural marriages in Nauvoo.
Now, why wouldn't they give the number like 4 of Joseph Smith's 37 or however many it was?
Yeah, they've studiously avoided that. So like they gave it like a count. There's like 731 or whatever women in plural marriage when they get to Salt Lake in 1847. But we don't know, not counting Joseph's wives.
Right.
You know, I mean, so we don't know how many wives there are. So why don't just say they say, oh, we can't tell because it's hard to know.
Mm-hmm.
And she accepted all 4 of those wives into her household. She may have approved of other marriages as well. May have.
May.
It's possible.
You could say 15% or more.
Yeah.
Is that Geico?
Yeah.
But Emma likely did not know about all of Joseph's sealings. She vacillated in her view of plural marriage, at some point supporting it and at other times denouncing it.
Yeah, so that was what I was reacting against. Yeah. And this other thing, Emma likely didn't know all about all of Joseph Smith's.
Right.
We can actually, that's one of the places where you don't need a weasel word. She definitely didn't know about all of Joseph's sealings.
Yeah.
So.
And they explain that coming up.
Who are the 4? I mean, is it Fanny, the 2 Partridge sisters, and one other?
Beeman?
No, what's her face?
What's her face?
Well, no, the most important Utah.
Eliza R.
Eliza Snow.
Yeah.
Eliza. Oh, yeah. She wrote "Oh My Father."
But didn't she kick all 4 of those out of her house eventually?
Which is why she vacillated. Well, that's what it says, right? Yeah. She accepted all of them into her household,
and then at one point,
and then kicked them all out.
Yeah, it doesn't say the second part.
Implicitly allowing for the possibility that she later kicked them out.
I love implicit.
Yeah. Okay, in the summer of 1843, Joseph Smith dictated the Revelation on Marriage, a lengthy and complex text containing both glorious promises and stern warnings if your name is Emma Smith. Some directed at Emma. Jeez. The Revelation instructed women and men that they must obey God's law and commands in order to receive the fullness of His glory or become ministering angels. Which I added at the end. But yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't before, my Mormon brothers and sisters, read 132 in context. That, when I was a Sunday school teacher, when I was a gospel doctrine teacher, and that came up, they only have you read a couple sections. And reading that in context and preparing for my lesson was just like, holy shit. Right.
Yeah, you don't even need to read it in context. Just read the whole goddamn thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's kind of in context.
Yeah, you don't need to know all the history and background.
Don't just pull out a couple verses. Read the
whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's shocking to me that some of those verses are still in. I think one, it specifies the number of virgins. Was it 10 virgins or something? 10 virgins. If God gives you 10 virgins, like how is that still in there? I don't get it.
Amazing.
Well, we don't really know how to follow the commandment, though.
Yeah, because God wasn't that specific.
Right.
Yeah.
Jake, are you okay?
I'm good.
Okay.
All right, John.
The revelation on marriage required that a wife give her consent before her husband could enter into plural marriage. Nevertheless, toward the end of the revelation, the Lord said that if the first wife receive not this law, the command to practice plural marriage, the husband would be, quote, exempt from the law of Sarah, presumably the requirement that the husband gain the consent of the first wife before marrying additional women. After Emma opposed plural marriage, Joseph was placed in an agonizing dilemma, forced to choose between the will of God and the will of his beloved Emma. He may have thought Emma's rejection of plural marriage exempted him from the law of Sarah. Her decision to, quote, receive not this law permitted him to marry additional wives without her consent. Because of Joseph's early death and Emma's decision to remain in Nauvoo as an obstinate apostate, not discuss plural marriage after the church moved west, many aspects of their story remain known only to the two of them.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that they refer to it as his early death? I mean, it seems in most cases they take every chance they can to say martyrdom, right, or use the word martyr.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's significant or not. Maybe it's totally not.
It was to you.
It was to me.
It stuck out.
Yeah.
It was different, right?
Yeah. So, I mean how much spin do you want to smash down in this one, John?
Well, my comments are clear by my reading.
Yeah, they are.
I mean,
Right.
Well, Joseph Smith was the real victim here. I think that's what this paragraph makes clear. He was the real victim of this whole thing. I mean, what was he supposed to do?
Yeah.
I mean, when Joseph F. Smith is before the Smoot hearings, and the senators are reading they're reading D&C 132 to him, and they're like going through and they're talking about this law of Sarah and this consent, and they essentially the senators are like, well, since there's an out, then her consent doesn't mean anything, right? And Joseph F. Smith is like, no, it means her consent. So in other words, it signifies her consent. Anyway,
well, what that means is you'll do whatever you want, but it's a lot cooler if you have her consent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the thing.
She has one choice. One choice.
Yeah, but her consent doesn't mean anything for her.
Yeah, it's not binding in any way.
It just means
either you can consent or I can do it behind your back. Which of these choices would you want, babe?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I love you.
Yeah. All right, Randy. Let's go to the trial and spiritual witness.
Yes.
Years later in Utah, participants in Nauvoo plural marriage discussed their motives for entering into the practice. God declared in the Book of Mormon, historical, that monogamy was the standard. At times, however, he commanded plural marriage so his people could raise up seed unto him, which is
unless they were married for just eternity only.
Yeah.
And by the way, polygamist societies do not have proliferation of progeny. Anyway, plural marriage did result in an increased number of children born to believing parents. What's the reference for that?
Well, Brigham Young had how many kids?
Well, so the men though, that's not more people than you would have otherwise. The men have more kids than they would have otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. So Brigham had over 50 wives and 100 children. Now,
right, I'm sorry.
Let's compare that to
right. If there were 50
wives,
if there were 50 men, then they would have had way more kids than that.
Way more kids. This whole because this is the thing I was.
But
always
how many of those 50 wives would have actually gotten married, though, Randy?
Shut up.
How many would have?
All of them.
All right.
I love their citation for that, though, Randy. It's see note 6 of Plural Marriage and Families in Early Utah. When you click on that goes to another church essay, Plural Marriage and Families in Early Utah. Talk about just masturbatory. I'm going to cite a note in another essay as authority for this essay.
But that's all scriptural footnotes ever do.
Well, okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's a scientific fact. Sorry, Jake. I just want 5 seconds.
Go ahead.
It's a scientific fact that polygamy does not increase population.
Yeah, and when you go to that that citation, they say go to footnote 6 of this other essay that we wrote, and it says studies have shown that monogamous women bore more children per wife than did polygamous wives, except the first. Fertility at the societal level, however, was enhanced because of the near universality of marriage among women and the abundant opportunities for remarriage among previously married women of childbearing age.
Yeah, that was what I was tongue-in-cheek going for. Yeah.
Well,
but I don't know.
All right, whatever.
John,
All right. Yeah,
Okay.
John,
All right.
what were you saying?
John, you're going to say something?
Oh, I said okay. to that the idea that about remarriage, that may be true. I don't know. So in other words, the fact that everybody constantly has to get remarried, maybe that does make more kids for them. I don't know.
All right.
Sure, which belies the point of the fact that these weren't somehow for having kids or having sex. So which of these do you want, church? Choose one, please.
Yeah, but what happens on modern communities that follow this principle? Eventually, there's not enough women for the men, and they start kicking adolescent boys off the reservation.
Do you know why that happens, though, Randy? I'm putting on my TBM whisperer.
Oh God!
Yeah, it's because the devil's winning. Like, the devil has inspired
those young men.
No laws. Well, you could go that way, John, if you want to. But the devil has inspired the law of the land to reject the eternal principle of eternal marriage that God would prefer that we live. So, okay, we're rendering unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but if we really had the fullness of plural marriage, there would be a plethora. I'm going to say that again, a plethora of women. But because it's just these small, fragmented people that are actually disobeying God's law of manifesto, they're not receiving the fullness of blessing. They're being cursed.
Yeah, but just do the math. Do the math.
I am a TBM whisperer. I do know math.
But the 50% of every child that's born is either 50% chance of male, 50% chance of female. And eventually, if you only have polygamy in the sense that a man can marry multiple women and not the reverse, eventually you're going to have a glut of superfluous males, and you got to get rid of them.
No, it doesn't actually always happen. In fact, actually, there's so I'll not do my TBM whisperer hat, but my empiricist hat, which is that what ends up happening is the marrying age for women goes down. So women get married at a younger and younger and younger age, and so that they cease to be, again, people. They're juveniles or whatever, and so they are in. So the first marriage for a woman is as a girl, as a 15 or 16 or whatever, and then the guy marrying age goes up and up and up. And so for lesser status males in the society, they're not getting married until they're 40 or so. And so what ends up happening is these high status patriarchs are getting married at age 70 to these young girls or whatever, and then they die. And then they free up 20 girls, right? And so then suddenly they all get married to new people. And so that's what happens. And so it actually doesn't It does work demographically. You just have to pull back out the marrying age.
Right.
The amount of time that the man is married is only the man is only married therefore for 20 some years or whatever, 20, 30 years in his life. The woman is married for 40, 50 years in her life. That's how it works mathematically.
And Randy,
plus male infants have a slightly higher mortality rate, so it wouldn't be quite. Well, actually, would that? Yeah, that would work.
And Randy, the reason that I know that your reasoning is wrong is because if it was right, God wouldn't have commanded it.
Yeah, that's great. Anyway, John, so putting back on your empiricist hat, if you're on an island and you got 50 men and 50 women, and you're just trying to start up a society with that starting point, does a polygamist arrangement, which is completely skewed towards the man, you can't do it both ways, give them an advantage to proliferate progeny?
No. But I'm just saying, so you don't have to produce lost boys. So in other words, that the fact that lost boys maybe got produced out of the FLDS experience recently,
well, that's Satan,
is based on the fact that is a freaky thing that's happened down there. Warren Jeffs and all that kind of stuff isn't necessarily the way all polygamous societies have had to operate. So I'm saying I've talked to demographers who do studies of more normal polygamous societies, and the way the polygamous societies work it out mathematically is the men, low status males, are married for much shorter period of their time, of their lifetimes than they usually only get to be married to one woman at some point in their life. And then the high status males are married to lots of women, but the women are married all through their life, and so that's how the years add up in the end.
Yeah, but I'm speaking to Jacob 2:30 that says if the Lord wants to raise up a seed, He will introduce polygamy, and it does not produce a population advantage.
No population advantage, and again, we haven't been able to identify a single righteous seed that's been raised up from Joseph Smith, right? So again, if that's the whole excuse, where are all the kids? So what's Joseph Smith doing in his marriages?
Oh, he's laying the foundation for Brigham Young.
But some of it, somebody's either conducting it righteously and somebody's conducting it unrighteously.
Which one is it, right?
Or whatever, because it's not producing righteous seed in Joseph Smith's case, and he's very fertile, as he shows with Emma. So,
where are we now?
Where are we now?
I think we're on this decision to accept, and that's John.
You're one up, but it does. You're some saints.
Oh, is that right?
Some saints.
Okay.
Some saints also saw plural marriage as a redemptive process of sacrifice and spiritual refinement. According to Helen Mar Kimball, Joseph Smith stated that, quote, the practice of this principle would be the hardest trial the saints would ever have to test their faith. Though it was one of the severest trials of faith, she testified that it had also been, quote, one of the greatest blessings. Her father, Heber C. Kimball, agreed. I have never felt more sorrowful, he said, of the moment when he learned of plural marriage in 1841. I wept days. I had a good wife. I was satisfied.
She was good in bed.
Well, but
satisfied sexually.
But wasn't the reason that he wept was because the way he found out about it was Joseph saying, hey, God's told me that Violet's going to be mine now.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's why he wept for days. It wasn't like, oh, I've got to take on another woman. I'm weeping for days over that.
Because he eventually did.
That's the most disturbing story that Mormons love to tell as a faith-promoting story. It's a horrific story.
It's the Abraham-Isaac story.
That is Abraham.
Yes. Yeah. It's horrific. And the right answer for Heber C. Kimball is, fuck you, Joseph.
Right. William Law's answer.
They flip it on its head and say the right answer is, take my wife, Joseph, go fuck her. Fuck her brains out. Because you're the prophet.
I feel like you're reading into that a little bit, but yeah.
I mean,
it's implicitly, Jake. Implicitly
allowing for the possibility.
I can't invoke the implicit shit.
It's blind obedience. That's the right answer. Is blind obedience because you trust in the Lord and His prophet Joseph Smith.
Yeah, that's the TPM spin on it. But just take that story and take Mormonism completely out of it. And that's a sick and twisted story that you would be completely rooting for Heber to tell Joseph to go fuck off.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I think that this is the big problem with this whole essay has been trying to reconcile the idea of morality by fiat, where if something that is so repugnant to our sensibilities and to our perception of what is constructive and positive interaction between human beings and between appropriate use of power and influence, we're having to reconcile and justify all of this, what we would perceive as abuse of those things. And it's the huge problem of, I don't know, religiosity in general for me is this idea of morality by fiat, where something that goes against everything you intrinsically feel is right or it should be the way things are, and you have to make excuses for why things that deviate from that are actually okay.
And I think you're right, Randy, because even if a believing Mormon is looking at David Koresh or Jim Jones or any of these cult leaders that are having sexual relations with their followers, Warren Jeffs,
it's so easy for them to say, look, that guy's twisted. Yeah, it's horrible.
But when it's hitting so close to home, then it becomes blind obedience because God really did command this one. Yeah.
By the way, Elizabeth Smart was several months before her 15th birthday when she was taken.
Yeah.
Coincidence? I don't think so.
Probably a coincidence, but I just like tying that.
Yeah, that was a tongue-in-cheek. Anyway, am I the next paragraph?
I'm going to push back on you for saying religiosity in general, because what I'm going to say, though, is on this is a specific LDS issue, and this entire essay is replete with it, which is trying to make leaders be infallible because of this idea that the leaders are perfect, the leaders are demigods, and you have to worship authority. So in this case, in Community of Christ, all of these things that we recognize that Joseph Smith is doing, the historian for Community of Christ has said this is abuse of priesthood authority.
Yeah, so, but how do you interpret the story of Abraham and Isaac?
I interpret that as being a thing that is happening in ancient Israel. So the ancient Israelites, this story is pieced together from multiple source texts. So it's the J source and it's the E source, and they're combined together in different ways. And the ancient Israelites had child sacrifice. And so one of the very commandments that the ancient Israelites are actually told that they have to do is stop killing your firstborn kids. And so this is a thing that is ultimately very alien to our experience. And so if we were to take it as it's written now as a modern theological proposition, it's absolutely abhorrent. And so when we read texts like that are in Scripture, what we use them as a basis for how we have a theological proposition or a philosophical proposition, and we say, in doing that thing, in Abraham's willingness to actually kill his son, that is morally repugnant. And we should think about how we live our lives today in such a way that we don't do that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. But was it intended that way?
Well, but
no, because they had a completely different value system back then.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying it's morality by fiat, where it's like it's something where you're asked to reinterpret something that was intended as a more straightforward example of, hey, look how faithful he was, and you have to reinterpret that in a way that will acquiesce to your modern sensibilities of morality. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying is that's what's going on in this essay. Is something in the past is going on. Yeah.
But that's because I don't think that the people in the past were perfect, and there was this golden age myth where everything has been having this continuous fall away from that. Rather, we have actually had a continual increase. So hopefully we are learning better, and we are increasing in knowledge and morality and ethics and all those kind of things, and we can look back on the past and say they were limited in this and that way, and that we're hopefully living better than they're living.
Well, you can attribute that to your God, or you can attribute it to enlightenment and reason and science.
Right.
Is there any directive you would take from a religious source that you would follow in spite of the fact that it conflicted with your own internal morality?
No.
Okay, well then I rescind what I say then.
Yeah,
Jake. I don't think you know who you're dealing with. You should listen back to the podcast we did with John Hamer.
Yeah. Who wrote the Book of Mormon? I listened to it. That was great.
So
basically,
very different kinds of religion. I'm not trying to defend the way the fundamentalist religions are, like the LDS Church. I completely agree that worshiping leaders is wrong.
Yeah,
and this essay is all about creating this idea of Joseph Smith as some kind of perfect leader to be worshipped, and that's wrong.
I want to push back on that just a tiny bit, because I see that they're giving Joseph a lot of wiggle room for imperfection in here by saying the principle that was restored to him may be perfect, but he didn't have perfect instructions on how to apply it. So he may have waffled around and goofed up in a few areas. That's just, humans are infallible. We can't expect them to be perfect. So you've got to have some give and take here. But
fallible, you mean?
Well, but they're not allowing for him to be. They're not allowing for him to be messing up or being imperfect, because they're providing it out in every instance. In every instance, he makes the right choice.
Right.
The question isn't whether humans are fallible. The question is whether Joseph Smith did bad things, and he did.
Right.
And so the point of it is that we need to say he did bad things. He was wrong. The way we learn from that is by repenting of those examples. So the things that our ancestors did in the past, in a lot of cases in the church, when they took up arms, when they did all these different things, these ended up having very bad results. And guess what? We learn from them. So it's better if we've had error and then we repent from error, and then we now have gotten into a better place than if we continuously deny that there was error. So that's what I mean.
Are you seeing that?
I think I should rescind the. I mean, when I said religiosity, I probably should have said fundamentalism.
Yes, that's what I've been trying to. I wanted to interject is that I think I back up everything you say, Jake. if you replace religiosity with fundamentalist religiosity.
Okay, all right. I'm willing to do that.
And
I agree with that too.
And John, are you what you just said about like learning from the past and not repeating the mistakes? Are you seeing that in this essay?
No, I'm saying that they don't. I think the LDS Church continuously refusing to acknowledge error, especially error on the part of leaders. So like, I mean, all the way through, when you don't admit that that the leaders are the ones that are responsible for this policy, the racist policy, let's say. Now there's all this condemnation or whatever of it, like the kind of non-apology that Hinckley made. It's like, if you think of these racist things, you're wrong. But he didn't go back and say, the leaders were wrong. We're doing this. The church, when it did it, was wrong, and we apologize. We repent from our error. And so, in not repenting, the church continues to fall into new error. So, once it didn't repent on that, it fights against women's rights. Once it didn't repent on that, it falls into fighting against gay rights.
Right.
So by not learning, not admitting your error, not repenting error, you continue to stay in error.
Right. And so, in this case, you're not saying Joseph Smith was wrong for having sex with women other than his wife, Emma. You're justifying it, so you're not giving that opportunity to learn and grow from these mistakes because you're not even acknowledging them as mistakes.
Right.
Right. Okay. I got you.
Yeah. The thing that bugs me is that my favorite word. You juxtapose this.
I thought "fuck" was your favorite word.
Well, okay. My second favorite word is juxtapose. You juxtapose this. Joseph just kind of meandering his way, trying to figure out this principle that God's really trying to teach him. He just keeps fucking up left and right. And you're right, fuck's my favorite word.
But you just used number 1 and number 2 in a sentence.
Right.
So congratulations.
To the image of Joseph Smith that's portrayed in the chapel on Sunday or in Relief Society or in Gospel Doctrine, he is this perfect, virtuous person. Infallible, and to me, this article is buried. It's disingenuous, and it's only appealing to people that are struggling, that will maybe look for the church to answer some of these questions. And to me, it's just like the epitome of deception. It's very subtle, slight, and clever deception.
Well,
I don't know. Hold on.
But hang on. It feels like we're kind of like jumping ahead to the conclusion, and we've still got a few paragraphs left to go.
Oh, can we just jump to the conclusion?
I know.
We're only almost to the conclusion.
We're like 3 more. We're almost there.
Endure to the end, boys.
All right.
Pioneer children sing
Yes, they read.
and red.
So Matt, I think it. Oh no, is it to Randy?
It is to Randy.
Decision to accept.
Oh, good God. Okay. Mute. Okay, I'm back. I'm back. The decision to accept such a wrenching trial usually came only after earnest prayer and intense soul searching. Brigham Young said that upon learning of plural marriage, it was the first time in my life that I had desired the grave. Oh, poor guy.
These poor men.
I had to pray unceasingly, he said, and I had to exercise faith, and the Lord revealed to me the truth of it, and that satisfied me. Heber C. Kimball found comfort only after his wife Violet had a visionary experience attesting to the rightness of plural marriage. She told me, Violet's daughter later recalled, she never saw so happy a man as father when when his wife said he could fuck other women. I'm sorry. Was when she described the vision and told him she was satisfied and knew it was from God. Oh my God, I gotta mute.
All right, Matt, let's just go.
Yeah.
Let's just go. Wrap it up.
Lucy Walker recalled her inner turmoil when Joseph Smith invited her to become his wife. Every feeling of my soul revolted against it, she wrote. Yet, after several restless nights on her knees in prayer, she found relief as her room filled with a holy influence akin to brilliant sunshine. She said, "My soul was filled with a calm, sweet peace that I never knew, and supreme happiness took possession of my whole being."
So all this is doing is presenting a model that they want the readers to follow. You know, that your first reaction to this is one of abhorrence. But then you pray about it, you realize it's from God, and you have sweet acceptance of it.
But it's thematic. They started up above talking about how these many later testified about their powerful spiritual experience that helped them overcome their hesitation, and now they're giving it to you.
Yeah.
It's once again the people who practiced this, they were okay with it, so you don't need to worry about it today.
Except for the bad people. Jake, would you tell us about the bad people?
The RLDS people.
Yeah, it says not all had such experiences.
No.
Jake?
I don't know why I'm the extra on the bad people.
No,
but,
because you're the next paragraph.
You're up. Read it.
Oh, yeah, I got it. Some Latter-day Saints rejected the principle.
No.
Yeah,
no.
I read the first sentence. He read from there.
Oh,
Go ahead, Jake.
okay. Sorry.
Not all had such experiences. Some Latter-day Saints rejected the principle of plural marriage and left the church, while others declined to enter the practice but remained faithful. Nevertheless, for many women and men, initial revulsion and anguish was followed by struggle, resolution, and ultimately light and peace. Sacred experiences enabled the saints to move forward in faith. I think you're right, Glenn. This is the model.
Yeah, that's what and they've done it 3 or 4 paragraphs in a row.
Yeah.
Oh, this is exactly what happened in Waco, Texas.
All right.
First, there was revulsion, struggle, and then resolution, and ultimately light and peace. But they forgot the last step: death by fire by the government.
Yeah. So we've got 2 more paragraphs. They're just going to echo what we've already heard, but here we go. The challenge of introducing a principle. Everybody, take a shot. As controversial as plural marriage is almost impossible to overstate. A spiritual witness of its truthfulness allowed Joseph Smith and other Latter-day Saints to accept this principle. And so can it for you. Difficult as it was, the introduction of plural marriage in Nauvoo did indeed, quote, raise up seed, end quote, unto God.
On a macro level,
yes.
Not Joseph Smith, but on a macro level. Maybe.
It's
possible.
Maybe.
It's implied that it might.
The introduction did in Utah then later.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, it's always like the Utah practice imposed back on.
But let's bring it home and make it personal to all of us here, because this last sentence of this first conclusion paragraph says that a substantial number of today's members descended through faithful Latter-day Saints who practice plural marriage.
Oh,
so
yeah.
You're not, even though it was a small percentage, we all that practiced it right, a large percentage came from it, which goes to their model of raising a righteous seed or whatever it did.
Yep.
All right, John.
Although my mom always taught us that we were descended in all cases from the first wife.
Oh, nice.
I'm amazed that bias lasted until the 1970s. I'm like, how did that get transmitted? But anyway, we were proud of that. That was a badge.
Why is that so important? If I mean,
I don't know why. I mean, it's a totally it's the kind of thing like I asked my mom, like when I'm 7 years old, I asked my mom about polygamy or whatever, because I thought, wow, that's crazy. That's not true or whatever. There people are making stuff up. And she's like, no, that's true. There was polygamy and our ancestors were polygamists or whatever, but we're descended from the first wife.
See, yeah, maybe that's like one of those distinctions that really shouldn't matter. It's like whether or not Joseph Smith had how many of his wives did Joseph Smith have sex with? Like, for some reason, the lower the number, the better it is, even though any number more than one is a huge indictment against him, right?
Right. I don't know. So I don't know why that – I'm just saying that lasted till the 70s in our family. So, okay, church members no longer practice plural marriage. Footnote, and we're going to have an exception coming up. But consistent with Joseph Smith's teachings, the church permits a man whose wife has died to be sealed to another woman when he remarries.
I.e., we practice plural marriage.
Let's remember the first sentence. Church members no longer practice plural marriage. except for where we're talking about the second sentence. Okay. So, moreover, members are permitted to perform ordinances on behalf of deceased men and women who married more than once on earth, sealing them to all the spouses to whom they were legally married. The precise nature of these relationships in the next life is, of course, not known, and many family relationships will certainly be sorted out, as we could imagine, in the next life to come. Latter-day Saints are encouraged to trust in our wise Heavenly Father, who loves his children and does all things for their growth and salvation.
It'll all make sense in the end.
So it doesn't matter.
It'll be sorted out. Don't worry about it.
So why do they even need to do it in the first place?
Maddening. Then why do it?
if the omnipotent God is going to just sort it out in the end, why are we spinning? Why are we like hamsters spinning on the wheel?
Because again, this isn't. Why do we do it in the first place? We're not coming from it from that end. We're coming from it. They did it. We're in a situation. Why do they have to, how do they explain it? Right. Yeah. So.
All right, boy, that was exhausting.
Hey, John, this is like totally different from what you're going to experience with DeLynn, right?
Well, that's tomorrow night, right?
It'll be a very different discussion. So, yeah, I'll see what that's about.
All right. That's awesome.
Couple fewer F-bombs, we'll see. I don't know.
Probably. So, are there any final conclusions?
But actually, one thing that is going to happen is there are going to be women on the panel. And by the way, when you're having a polygamy panel, having all guys do it is a bit of a thing. I don't know.
Yeah, you're right.
That's our MO.
You're right. Well, what we should have had Allison, because then it could have been like the four of us, and no, that doesn't work. We needed four women and just like John.
Right.
we need the homosexual guy with four women.
Right, but they're all one-way calls. Like none of the other ones know that the other ones are on the call. It's just 4 one-way calls between John and all of the women. That would be most appropriate.
Sounds fun.
Okay, I have one thing to say. I mean, granted, there are a lot of problems with the spin, right? But the thing is, this essay acknowledges polyandry, acknowledges Helen Mar Kimball, acknowledges teenage brides, and it also acknowledges the fact that Joseph Smith was dishonest with Emma. I mean, I don't know if we can acknowledge the fact that these are huge. That's pretty big. That's a big deal.
Yeah. Sorry, Jake, but they had to.
I mean, I'm not saying they're doing it. I'm not saying
the world of the fucking internet
thing. I'm not saying it's this altruistic thing. I just think we should acknowledge, as we've taken all this time to shit on it, I think that we should acknowledge, like, whatever their motivations are, like, this is a major step.
Not
toward anything. Maybe not a major step, but it was a major concession anyway.
Well, it's a concession they were forced to at gunpoint at their head.
Yeah, and
I don't give credit for that shit.
And I think because of the way that it's spun, I mean, I can't imagine another way that they would spin it, but I don't know. It almost doesn't count to me for some reason.
Right. I don't know how much credit someone should get or an organization should get for not lying as much anymore. Like, that doesn't seem like a very, illustrious blue ribbon
low
pin
bar.
Right. It's a pretty low bar, but this still is pretty significant, right? I just want to acknowledge that.
It's different from total outright, saying crazy stuff, right? So in other words, it's like trying to spin all of this in a way that you could coherently can. I mean, and so therefore they're in kind of crazy desperation. There's like 5 paragraphs on polyandry.
Yeah.
Because there's anyway.
I think it would be interesting to compare this to things that the church has published in the past, maybe in Sunday school manuals or things like that, and see what's different. But who's got the time for something like that?
Well, it's going to be way more than that, because in the past it's going to. I mean, in the manual before, it's like in the old Brigham Young manual, it's like Brigham Young and his wife.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right. This ignoring any polygamy at all.
Yeah,
and I lost my train of thought.
All right.
Well, here's my take. We can embrace we can embrace the spin that the church gives here and just accept it as true. That's fine. And if we do, they're still wrong. That still doesn't help their argument. So, I mean, I can turn it against them and say, even if everything you say in this essay is true, it still belies your position.
Wait, how?
Because you're acknowledging, because polygamy just period is an abusive and a horrible practice towards women and towards families. There was
but what they're saying is this is what God commanded. And so you're acknowledging that by being obedient to God's commandments is a bad thing because polygamy is abusive?
Yes, I'm saying that I reject the idea that this is...
Well, but if you
God's
reject that, then you're not accepting what they're saying in the article.
Yeah, factually I am. Historically I am.
Okay.
It's the same as saying, oh yeah, God condoned genocide and genocide and slavery. Well, okay. There's no justification for it. Let's accept that happened factually. That's what belies your position that you speak for God.
So you're saying that if you accept that there is a God and that God did command Joseph Smith to do these things, then you're still saying that God is a dick.
No, I'm saying that this demonstrates that Joseph Smith does not speak for him.
Oh.
So if you're a member and you look at this...
So it's like a theological proposition. In other words, if you're going to look at what you think, would a God do that thing that you're envisioning, that kind of definition of that kind of a God and that kind of a God doing that kind of thing, it falls apart theologically because with that kind of a God isn't worthy of worship.
Right.
Yeah, but I think even then, Matt, you're not accepting the full message that's here. You're selecting part of the message and rejecting others.
No, I accept that, but I think there are members out there who will take my position and just kind of say, "The fuck."
Yeah.
Okay, so here's I finally got my train of thought back. So we better listen, right? So the line of bullshit I was fed, because polygamy really bothered me. I still remember where I was when one of my fellow teachers, I was 14, 15 years old. I was in the cultural hall, told me, Brigham Young had over 50 wives. And I'm like, yeah, but... And he's like, yeah, but he had over 100 kids. And the line I was fed before that was, look, a lot of Mormons got killed because we were so persecuted. There was more women than men. And most of the time, they were just taking widows into their home because they had the means to take care of them. So I submit that that's still the narrative that a big chunk of Mormons still believe, that polygamy was just a necessity of the circumstances, and then we abandoned it when those circumstances changed. And this article, I don't think changes that one iota, because none of these people that accepted that line of bullshit that I accepted when I was 14 are going to read this article.
But it actually...
Yeah, but that's not the article's fault.
It doesn't repeat that, right? So in other words, it isn't saying it's only because there's a bunch of widows.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that that's old apologetics, and one thing that we're seeing in having read this thing, that's not what it's simply repeating,
It's not simply repeating that, but it's certainly not trumping it. It's not. They're not reading this on the fucking pulpit on Sunday. They're not putting it in the fucking manuals. They're hiding it like they always do. They never change policies like on birth control. They just silently abandon it, and it's this disingenuous bullshit MO of the LDS Incorporated that pisses me off, because it doesn't change anything.
Wasn't there something that was read over the pulpits recently that let members know that there were these essays on LDS.org?
I don't know, Matt. You're the one with the ears on the ground.
Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't heard that.
Okay,
but I'm not saying it hasn't. Hey, so can I read a quote real quick? Here's a quote. I confess that I cannot forbid a person to marry several wives, for it does not contradict the Scripture. If a man wishes to marry more than one wife, he should be asked whether he is satisfied in his conscience that he may do so in accordance with the Word of God. In such a case, the civil authority has nothing to do in the matter. That's Martin Luther.
Oh.
I don't know what that means.
Oh. Okay.
Wow.
I used to always. So when I was on my mission, when I learned about Joseph Smith, that's what tripped me up. I knew about Brigham Young. Like, of course he was a polygamist. And I was like, Joseph Smith, no. And then one of my companions said, yeah, Martin Luther said it was okay. I was like, really? That makes it okay.
Martin Luther said it's okay to kill the Jews.
Right.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Got some beta waiting and I think I might like never in a little afternoon delight. Sky rockets in flight. Afternoon delight. Afternoon delight.
Hi, this is Brian Kissel from Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm one of those liberal Mormons that the infants totally threw under the bus a little while back. You remember that episode, right? Good thing we have forgiveness. You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com. And if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes. I did. Okay, well, I actually haven't yet, but I'm going to go do it right now, so you should also come and do it right now. Anyone for the closing prayer?
Thinking of you's working up an appetite. Looking forward to a little afternoon delight. Rubbing sticks and stones together make a sparks ignite. And the thought of rubbing you is getting so excited.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.